They say every gunfight has a moment before the trigger gets pulled, when time stops and a man can see his whole life laid out like cards on a table. Emma Carson had that moment standing in the dust outside the Brazos County Courthouse. Her Colt 45 aimed steady at Wade Thornton's chest, while his rifle barrel stared back at her like a one-eyed judge. Between them stood the horse they'd both die for, though for different reasons. Blood ran dark and thick from the animal's shoulder, mixing with the red Texas dirt until you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Wade's finger twitched on the trigger. Sweat cut rivers through the dust on his weathered face. "That horse murdered my brother," he said, and his voice carried the weight of 3 years spent nursing a wound that wouldn't heal. "Texas law says I got the right to justice." Emma didn't blink. Her arm held steady even though her heart hammered against her ribs hard enough to crack bone. "Texas law also says a woman can defend her property," she replied. "You want him, Wade? You go through me first." The horse, a massive stallion the color of burnished copper in the high sun, stood absolutely still between them. His flanks heaved with labored breathing. His eyes, the color of old amber, watched both humans with an intelligence that seemed almost otherworldly. He knew what was happening. He'd been here before, standing in the space between life and death while men with guns decided his fate. People asked me when I knew I'd die for that horse. When I understood that some bonds run deeper than blood or reason or self-preservation. Truth is, I knew the moment I saw what they'd done to him. The scars that mapped his body like a testament to human cruelty. The way he flinched at sudden movements but never backed down from a fight. I recognized all of it because I'd seen the same things staring back at me from mirrors in cheap boarding houses across 3 states. We were the same, that horse and I. Survivors of violence we didn't ask for, carrying damage we couldn't hide, looking for one place in this world where we might finally be allowed to exist in peace. But peace is a luxury people like us don't get to keep for long. The moment before Wade's finger completed its journey to the trigger, before Emma's muscles tensed for the recoil she knew was coming, we need to go back. Back to where it started. Back to a dusty road and a desperate woman and a dollar that bought more than land. It bought a reckoning. 3 months earlier, Emma Carson rode into Cottonwood Springs with everything she owned, tied to a paint mare named Willow, and $32 sewn into the lining of her coat. The town squatted at the crossroads of 2 cattle trails in Brazos County, Texas, looking about as permanent as morning dew. False-fronted buildings lined a main street that turned to soup when it rained and concrete when it didn't. The kind of place where people came to disappear or start over, which made it perfect for someone who needed to do both. Emma was 28 years old that summer of 1888, though she'd lived enough for 2 lifetimes. She sat tall in the saddle despite 3 days of hard riding, her spine straight as a rifle barrel, her eyes scanning the street with the wariness of a woman who'd learned that showing weakness was the fastest way to invite trouble. Her dark hair was pulled back severe and practical. Her clothes were men's work pants and a shirt faded from too many washings and too many different rivers. She wore a gun belt with a Colt 45 that showed the kind of wear that came from actual use, not for show. A boy of maybe 12 sat on a bench outside the general store, whittling a piece of cottonwood into something that might become a horse if he had enough patience. He looked up as Emma dismounted, his eyes taking in the stranger with the frank curiosity of youth. "Morning, ma'am," he said, demonstrating the kind of manners that meant someone had raised him right. "Morning," Emma replied, pulling a penny from her pocket and flipping it to him in one smooth motion. "Tell me something. Where would a person go to find work around here?" The boy caught the coin without looking, which told Emma he'd done this before. "What kind of work you after?" "The kind that comes with a roof and 3 meals. I can do about anything that needs doing." The boy studied her for a long moment, his young face showing the kind of seriousness that came from growing up fast in hard country. "Courthouse might have postings," he said finally, "but I should tell you, miss, most folks around here don't take kindly to hiring women for ranch work. No offense meant." "None taken," Emma said, though the familiar sting of it settled in her chest like an old bruise that never quite healed. "I'll try my luck anyway." "Courthouse is that brick building down the street," the boy added. "Can't miss it. It's the only thing in this town that looks like it might last another 10 years. He paused, his knife going still against the wood. "If you're looking to stay, though, you should know people been talking about that Willow Creek place, the ranch that's been for sale." Something in his tone made Emma's attention sharpen. "What about it?" "They say it's cursed. The boy's voice dropped to the register kids use when they're trying to sound older, more knowing. 3 families tried to make a go of it in the past 5 years. None of them lasted more than a season. Last ones, the Harlows, they just up and vanished 6 months back. Left everything behind like the place was on fire. But there weren't no fire. People always got stories, Emma said, but she filed the information away. Maybe so, the boy agreed, but folks say there's something still living out there, something that drove all them families away. Emma thanked the boy and made her way toward the courthouse, Willow's reins loose in her hand. The paint mare followed with the patient resignation of a horse that had learned to trust her rider's judgment, even when that judgment led them to places other people avoided. The courthouse rose 3 stories, red brick that held the heat like a kiln. Inside, the air was marginally cooler, but thick enough to chew. Emma found the public notice board just past the entrance, a cork surface covered with wanted posters, auction announcements, and the everyday business of a town trying to civilize itself at the edge of nowhere. Her eyes scanned past most of it, looking for anything that might provide employment. Then she saw it. A notice so unusual she had to read it 3 times to make sure her trail-weary eyes weren't playing tricks. Property available. Willow Creek Ranch, approximately 300 acres, structures included. Sale price, $1. Property sold as is, all existing conditions apply. Buyer assumes all liability. Inquire with county clerk, room 12. Emma stood motionless, her mind working through the implications. Nobody sold a ranch for $1 unless something was fundamentally wrong with it. But even as common sense warred with the desperate hope that had kept her moving for the past 5 years, her feet were already carrying her toward room 12. The county clerk was a thin man with spectacles that kept sliding down his nose and the harried look of someone who'd given up trying to make sense of the world and just documented its madness instead. He looked up as Emma entered, his expression shifting from neutral to something that might have been sympathy. "Help you, miss?" "The ranch listing on the board," Emma said. "The one for $1. That legitimate?" The clerk, whose nameplate identified him as Deputy Clerk Robert Hayes, removed his spectacles and cleaned them with a handkerchief that had seen better days. "It is," he said slowly, "though I'll save us both some time by being honest about what you'd be buying." "I'm listening." Hayes sighed and leaned back in his chair, which creaked in protest. "That property has what you might call a troubled history. Like the notice says, 3 families in 5 years. The first ones, they claimed the land was cursed, said animals went crazy for no reason. Tools disappeared, sounds in the night that didn't come from anything natural. The second family, they lasted 4 months before the husband broke his leg in 3 places when his horse spooked and threw him. The third family, the Harlows, they were the strangest case." Emma waited, her expression neutral, even as her pulse quickened. "Martha Harlow came into town one morning in early spring, packed up supplies like she was provisioning for a siege and left. Never said a word to anyone about why. Week later, folks went out to check on them. House was empty, food still on the table, beds made, wagons still in the barn. They were just gone." Hayes met Emma's eyes. "Marshall went out there, man named Caleb Jennings. He was looking into the property because there'd been some question about a horse out there, some legal matter. Marshall never came back either. Folks assume he moved on, following whatever trail he was chasing. But it was peculiar. He left his horse at the livery, never settled his bill." "What kind of legal matter about a horse?" Emma asked. Hayes hesitated, then seemed to decide she had a right to know what she'd be getting into. "There was a horse out there, apparently. Big stallion, copper-colored. Rumor was it belonged to a man named Victor Thornton, who died down in Amarillo a few years back. Died violently. Some say the horse killed him, though I never saw any official report confirming that. Thornton's brother Wade, he's been trying to get that horse for years, claims it's rightfully his, part of his brother's estate. And the county's selling the land with a horse on it that might belong to someone else? We're selling the land as is with whatever's on it," Hayes said carefully. "The county just wants someone to take responsibility and pay the taxes going forward. Current tax burden is $12 a year, due each January. Miss it, and the land reverts to county ownership." He pulled out a form and a pen. "If you're seriously interested, I need your name and your dollar." Emma pulled a silver dollar from her pocket, one she'd been saving for 2 years, and set it on the desk with a sound like a judgment being passed. "Emma Carson," she said, "and I'm serious. 20 minutes later, Emma walked out of the courthouse with a deed bearing her name and a legal description of 300 acres she'd never laid eyes on. Her hands wanted to tremble as she folded the document and tucked it into her shirt, but she wouldn't allow it. Not here, not where people could see. She owned land. After 5 years of running, of sleeping in haylofts and under stars, of working other people's cattle and living on the sufferance of strangers, she had something that belonged to her alone. Even if it might be cursed, even if it came with a mystery about a missing marshal and a horse that may or may not have killed a man, it was hers. The ride to Willow Creek Ranch took the better part of the afternoon. Hayes's directions led Emma west out of town, then north along a trail so faint it was more a suggestion than an actual road. The landscape shifted from scrub brush to rolling prairie to rocky outcroppings that thrust up from the earth like broken bones. Signs of human habitation grew scarcer with each mile until Emma began to wonder if the ranch existed at all, or if this was some elaborate joke the town played on desperate strangers. Then she crested a rise, and there it was. The disappointment hit physical and sharp as a punch to the gut. The main house sagged in the middle like an old horse with a broken back. The front porch was missing boards, creating gaps like missing teeth in an old man's smile. The barn listed to the left at an angle that suggested it was only stubbornness keeping it upright. Fencing lay in tangled heaps across what might have once been pastures. Tumbleweeds had piled against every vertical surface like the land itself was trying to bury the evidence of human ambition. It was, without question, the sorriest piece of property Emma had ever seen. It was also, legally and completely, hers. She dismounted and stood for a long moment, taking it all in. Willow stamped impatiently, eager for water and rest after the long ride. Emma led the mare toward what she hoped was a functioning well near the house. The pump handle was rusty, and it took several hard pulls before it creaked to life. The water that eventually sputtered out ran cloudy at first, then cleared to cold and clean. At least that was something. While Willow drank, Emma approached the house. The front door hung partially open, moving slightly in the breeze that swept across the prairie in the late afternoon. She pushed it wider, waiting for her eyes to adjust to the dim interior. The smell hit her first. Dust and abandonment and something else. Something organic that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. The place wasn't empty like Hayes had said. It was abandoned, which was different. Furniture remained, a table with 2 chairs, an iron bed frame in what must be the bedroom, a stove in the kitchen area. All of it covered in a thick layer of dust and grime. Sunlight streamed through gaps in the roof, illuminating thousands of dust motes that danced in the still air. Emma moved through the house slowly, cataloging what remained and what would need fixing. The stove looked functional. There were a few tin plates and cups in a cabinet, a lamp with oil still in it. The bed frame had a mattress that had definitely seen better days but might be salvageable. It was depressing, but it wasn't hopeless. She'd slept in worse places. After settling Willow with some grain Emma had bought in town, she decided to inspect the barn before full darkness fell. The structure was larger than it had appeared from a distance, with multiple stalls and a loft accessible by a ladder that looked only marginally safe. Most of the stalls were empty and thick with old straw and cobwebs that draped from the rafters like funeral bunting. Emma was 3 stalls in when she stopped. Fresh manure, not old and dried, but recent. Within the last day, maybe 2. Her hand moved instinctively to the pistol at her hip as she scanned the shadows that gathered in the corners of the barn. "If someone's in here," she called out, her voice steady despite the adrenaline dumping into her bloodstream, "show yourself. I'm the new owner and I'm armed." The response was immediate and unexpected. A deep rumbling snort from the last stall, followed by the sound of something large moving in the darkness. Not the furtive scrabbling of a vagrant or a thief, but the deliberate movement of an animal aware of its own power. Emma approached cautiously, her eyes gradually adjusting to make out a shape in the gloom. When recognition finally came, her breath caught in her throat. A horse stood in the stall, watching her with an intensity that raised goosebumps on her arms despite the summer heat. But this wasn't some gentle farm horse or an abandoned nag left behind by the previous owners. This animal was massive, easily 17 hands at the shoulder, with the kind of muscled build that spoke to speed and power in equal measure. In the dim light filtering through gaps in the barn walls, his coat appeared to be a deep reddish brown. the color of copper left to oxidize in the rain, though it was hard to tell beneath the layers of dirt and neglect. What struck Emma most was the intelligence in his eyes. This horse was studying her just as carefully as she was studying him, assessing whether she represented threat or opportunity. His ears were forward but tense. His nostrils flared as he took in her scent. Every line of his body communicated readiness, the coiled potential for explosive movement held in check by conscious choice rather than fear or submission. "Well," Emma said softly, keeping her hand away from her weapon, "I wasn't expecting a roommate." The horse's ears flicked toward her voice, but he didn't move closer or retreat. He simply watched and waited. Emma could see he was in rough shape despite the poor light. His ribs were too prominent, pressing against his hide like fingers under a blanket. His coat was matted with burrs and what looked like dried mud. His hooves were overgrown, the walls cracked and chipped from months of neglect. But underneath all of that, beneath the damage that time and abandonment had wrought, Emma could see an animal of remarkable quality. Powerful hindquarters that suggested explosive speed, a deep chest built for endurance, a refined head with a slightly dished profile that hinted at desert bloodlines somewhere in his ancestry. "How long have you been here?" Emma asked, though she didn't expect an answer. "Did the Harlows just leave you, or did you belong to someone else?" The horse snorted again, softer this time, almost like he was considering her question. Emma took a step back, not wanting to crowd him or trigger an aggressive response. She'd been around horses her whole life, and she recognized the signs of an animal that had been mistreated. The wariness, the tension, the way he positioned himself in the far corner of the stall, maximizing his options for fight or flight. "All right," she said, keeping her voice low and calm. "I'm going to get myself settled for the night. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do about you." As she turned to leave the barn, she felt the weight of his gaze following her into the gathering darkness. The sensation was so strong it was almost physical, like being watched by something that understood far more than it should. That night, Emma lay on the floor of the ranch house wrapped in her bedroll, too tired to do more than minimal cleaning. Through the broken roof, she could see stars scattered across the black sky, like someone had thrown a handful of diamonds against velvet. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled its loneliness to the moon. From the barn, she occasionally heard sounds of movement, her mysterious equine companion making his presence known. Emma's mind churned with questions she couldn't answer. Who owned the horse? Had he been left behind deliberately or by accident? How had he survived on his own for what must have been weeks or months? And most pressingly, what was she supposed to do about him? She had no legal claim to the animal. Technically, if what Hayes said was true, he might belong to Wade Thornton or his brother's estate. Taking possession of him could constitute horse theft, which was still a hanging offense in some jurisdictions. But as Emma stared up at the stars through the holes in her roof, she felt a strange certainty settling over her like a blanket. That horse and she were meant to find each other, both abandoned by circumstance, both surviving against odds that should have killed them, both too stubborn to quit even when quitting would have been easier. Tomorrow, she decided she'd start earning his trust. Whatever his story was, they were in this together now. She'd bought this land for $1, sight unseen, with nothing but desperation and hope to guide her. What was one more impossible thing? Dawn came too early, announced by roosters that Emma hadn't known existed on the property. She dragged herself upright, every muscle in her body protesting after 3 days on horseback and a night on a hard floor. Her first priority was getting a fire going in the stove and making coffee strong enough to resurrect the dead. While she waited for the coffee to boil, Emma took stock of her supplies. She had enough food for maybe a week if she was careful, a small amount of grain for Willow, and exactly $17.32 to her name after buying the ranch and provisions. Not much to build a new life on, but she'd managed with less before. The trick was to take it one day at a time, one problem at a time, and not think too hard about everything that could go wrong. After forcing down some hardtack and dried beef that required more chewing than it was worth, Emma filled a bucket with water from the well and headed to the barn. Willow nickered a greeting from her stall, but Emma's attention was on the last enclosure where the big copper-colored stallion waited. He was standing alert when she arrived, clearly having heard her approach long before she entered the barn. In the morning light streaming through gaps in the walls, Emma could see him more clearly than she had the previous evening. His coat really was a remarkable shade of copper, like a new penny fresh from the mint. His mane and tail, though tangled with burrs and debris, were long and full. Those eyes, dark amber, shot through with gold, tracked her every movement with an awareness that seemed almost human in its intensity. "Good morning," Emma said quietly, approaching the stall with deliberate slowness. "I've brought you water. I'm going to set it right here." She placed the bucket just outside the stall, within his reach but not so close that he'd feel cornered or threatened. The stallion eyed the bucket but made no move toward it while she was near. Emma grabbed a pitchfork from where it leaned against the wall and began the unpleasant task of mucking out Willow's stall, keeping up a steady stream of conversation as she worked. "I figure we should get properly introduced," she said, her voice pitched low and even. "My name's Emma Carson. I bought this place yesterday, though calling it a purchase seems generous when it only cost $1. I'm guessing you've been here longer than me. Got a name?" The stallion's ears swiveled toward her voice, the only indication he was listening. "No, well, I can't keep calling you horse or you. Seems disrespectful." Emma paused in her work, leaning on the pitchfork as she studied him. "How about Copper? Because of your coat. Simple, but it fits." The horse regarded her with those intelligent eyes, and Emma chose to interpret his lack of objection as acceptance. She went back to work, filling the wheelbarrow with old straw and manure, then wheeling it outside to dump on what looked like it had once been a manure pile. When she returned, she noticed Copper had moved closer to the water bucket, though he still hadn't drunk from it. "I know you don't trust me yet," Emma continued as she started on the next stall. "That's smart. Trust should be earned, not given freely. But here's my situation. I'm alone out here. Got no family, no friends, and about $17 standing between me and starvation. This ranch is my last chance at having something of my own. And like it or not, you come with the property." She worked methodically, cleaning stalls and forking fresh straw into place. The physical labor felt good after days of riding. It gave her hands something to do and her mind a chance to work through the problems that lay ahead. Food was the most pressing concern. She needed to figure out what the land could provide and what she'd have to purchase. Repairs to the house and barn would take materials she couldn't afford. And then there was the mystery of Copper himself, hanging over everything like a storm cloud on the horizon. By mid-afternoon, Emma had made the barn marginally more livable for both horses. She'd found a surprising amount of usable hay in the loft, dry and still sweet-smelling despite its age. She'd cleaned and filled water troughs. She'd repaired a broken gate on one of the stalls using techniques her father had taught her when she was still young enough to believe the world was a fair place. And through it all, she talked to Copper about her plans for the ranch, about the work that needed doing, about the weather and the quality of the hay and the family of mice she'd discovered living in the grain bin. Letting him get used to her voice, her presence, the fact that she wasn't going to hurt him or make demands he couldn't meet. By late afternoon, Copper had drunk the water she'd left and even accepted a small offering of hay, though he still wouldn't let her within 10 feet of him. Progress, Emma thought. Slow, but progress nonetheless. That evening, as the sun painted the western sky in shades of orange and purple, Emma sat on the broken porch of her house and ate a cold dinner of beans and hardtack. Copper had moved from the barn to the paddock attached to it, a small enclosure where he could see the house and the surrounding land. He stood at the fence line, his head high, his body silhouetted against the fading light. Emma watched him and felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of kinship that had nothing to do with species and everything to do with shared experience. She saw in Copper what she felt in herself, the wariness of something that had been hurt and learned to expect more pain, the determination to survive despite the odds, the loneliness of being fundamentally alone in a world that didn't seem to want you in it. "We're going to make it," Emma said, though she wasn't sure if she was talking to Copper or herself. "I don't know how yet, but we will." The horse turned his head toward her voice, his ears forward, listening. And in that moment, Emma felt the first thread of connection between them, fine as spider silk, but real nonetheless. It would take time. It would take patience. But she could work with time and patience. Those were resources she had in abundance, even if money and materials were scarce. As darkness fell and the stars began their nightly emergence, Emma made her way back into the house. She built a fire in the stove, despite the summer heat, needing the light and comfort more than worrying about the temperature. By the flickering glow, she pulled out a small leather journal she'd been keeping since Missouri, back when she still had a different name and a different life. She opened to a fresh page and began to write, not about the events of the day, but about the horse, about the intelligence she saw in his eyes, about the scars she glimpsed on his body, even through the dirt and neglect, about the way he carried himself with a dignity that no amount of hardship had managed to break. Emma Carson didn't know it yet, but she was beginning to document the story that would define the rest of her life. The story of a woman and a horse who found each other at the edge of nowhere and built something worth fighting for, worth dying for, if it came to that. But that night, in the broken house with the stars visible through the roof, all she knew was that she wasn't alone anymore, and neither was Copper. For two souls who'd spent too long in isolation, that was enough to kindle hope in even the coldest darkness. The next morning began with a discovery that changed everything. Emma woke before dawn, pulled from sleep by a sound that didn't belong. Not the wind or the usual animal noises, but something else. Something that made her reach for the pistol she'd kept within arm's reach all night. She moved to the window, careful not to silhouette herself against the faint pre-dawn light. Copper stood in the paddock, his body rigid with tension, his head high and his ears pinned back. He was staring at something Emma couldn't see from her position. His posture screamed danger in a language older than words. Emma pulled on her boots and grabbed her gun, moving out onto the porch as quietly as the broken boards would allow. The world was caught in that strange liminal space between night and day, where shadows still held dominion, but the promise of light edged the eastern horizon. She could see Copper clearly now, and she followed his line of sight toward the barn. There, barely visible in the gloom, were fresh boot prints in the dust. Large prints, made by someone heavy, leading from the road to the barn and back again. Emma felt her blood turn cold. Someone had been here during the night, close enough to the barn to look inside, close enough to see Copper, close enough to see Emma sleeping in the house with nothing but broken walls between her and whatever threats the darkness held. She approached the barn carefully, her gun drawn, half expecting someone to still be hiding inside. But the structure was empty except for the horses. What she found instead was worse than an intruder. Scrawled in the dust of the barn floor, written with a stick or a finger, were three words: "That horse dies." Emma stood staring at the message while her mind raced through the implications. Someone knew Copper was here. Someone wanted him dead, and someone was willing to come onto her property in the dead of night to make their intentions clear. She thought about Hayes's mention of Wade Thornton, Victor's brother, who claimed ownership of the horse. She thought about the missing marshal who'd come looking for Copper and never returned. She thought about the Harlow family who'd fled this place like it was cursed, leaving everything behind. And she looked at Copper, who stood in the paddock watching her with those knowing eyes. And she understood with sudden clarity that this wasn't just about a horse or a piece of land. This was about something deeper. Something that tied back to violence and death and secrets that someone wanted to keep buried. Emma Carson had come to Willow Creek Ranch looking for a fresh start, a place to hide from her past and build a future. What she'd found instead was another fight. But this time she wasn't alone. This time she had something worth fighting for beyond mere survival. She walked out to the paddock where Copper waited. The stallion tensed as she approached, but he didn't retreat. Emma stopped at the fence line, keeping the barrier between them, and spoke with the same matter-of-fact tone she'd used to discuss the weather. "Someone wants you dead," she said. "Someone who's not afraid to come onto this property to make their point. Now, I don't know what you did or didn't do. I don't know if you killed Victor Thornton or if that's just a story people tell. But here's what I know. This is my land now, bought and paid for, legal as Sunday morning. And you're on my land. That makes you my responsibility." Copper's ears flicked forward, listening. "So here's how this is going to work," Emma continued. "I'm going to protect you because that's what you do for things under your care. And you're going to trust me enough not to bolt the first time things get difficult. We clear?" The horse didn't answer because horses don't talk. But he took one step closer to the fence, close enough that Emma could see the old scars that crisscrossed his copper hide like a map of pain. Close enough that she could see the intelligence burning in those amber eyes. And something else. Something that looked almost like recognition. Emma Carson had killed a man once in self-defense, in a different life under a different name. She learned that violence had a weight to it, a gravity that pulled everything into its orbit. Looking at Copper, at the scars and the wariness and the barely controlled power, she understood that violence had found them both. The only question now was whether they'd face it alone or together. She made her choice in that moment, Standing in the pre-dawn light with a horse who might be a killer and a threat written in the dust of her barn, she chose to stand, to fight, to refuse to run anymore, because she'd run far enough and it hadn't saved her yet. Together then, Emma said quietly. And though Copper didn't move or make a sound, Emma felt something shift between them. An acknowledgement, an acceptance. The beginning of a bond that would be tested in fire and blood before it was done. The sun crested the horizon, painting the broken ranch in shades of gold and amber. Emma stood at the fence line with her hand resting on weathered wood, and Copper stood on the other side, and both of them watched the light come into the world, waiting for whatever came next. Because something was coming. Emma could feel it in her bones the same way she'd felt the storm gathering back in Missouri before everything fell apart. The difference was, this time she wasn't running. This time she had ground to defend and a reason to defend it. This time she had Copper. And Copper, whether he knew it yet or not, had her. The war for Willow Creek Ranch had begun. Emma spent the morning after finding the threat erasing the words from the barn floor, sweeping the dust until no trace remained. It was a futile gesture, and she knew it. You couldn't erase a threat by destroying the evidence. The words might be on, but the intent behind them still hung in the air, like gun smoke that refused to clear. She worked anyway, the physical motion giving her hands something to do while her mind worked through possibilities and problems. Copper watched from his paddock, and Emma had the distinct impression he understood more than a horse should. The way his eyes tracked her movements, the way he positioned himself between the barn and the road, as if standing guard. Animals developed instincts for survival that humans had forgotten in their rush towards civilization. Copper's instincts were screaming danger, and Emma had learned long ago to trust that kind of knowing. By mid-morning, the sun had turned the ranch into a furnace. Heat shimmered off the broken roof of the house in waves that made the distant horizon dance and blur. Emma filled buckets at the well, her shoulders protesting the repetitive motion. Water for the horses, water for herself, water to dampen the dust that seemed to coat everything within minutes of cleaning. It was endless work, the kind that ground you down to nothing if you let it. She was hauling the third bucket when she noticed Copper had moved to the far corner of the paddock, his body tense, his ears swiveling like radar dishes tracking something she couldn't yet see. Emma set down the bucket and moved to where she'd left her rifle leaning against the porch post. By the time she had it in hand, she could hear what Copper had detected minutes earlier. Hoofbeats, multiple riders coming from the direction of town. 3 men materialized out of the heat shimmer, their horses moving at an easy walk that said they weren't in any hurry. They had time, they had purpose. The man in the lead sat his horse with the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no in a way that stuck. He was maybe 45, built solid, with a face weathered by wind and sun until it looked like old leather. His eyes, even from a distance, held a kind of hardness that came from years of getting what he wanted through force of will or force of violence. Emma stood on the porch with the rifle held loose but ready, watching them approach. Copper had gone absolutely still in the paddock, every muscle coiled tight. The stallion's eyes never left the lead rider, and there was something in his posture that spoke of recognition, of history, of old wounds remembered. The 3 men stopped about 20 feet from the house, close enough for conversation but far enough to give everyone room to think. The leader touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that might have been polite if his eyes hadn't been so cold. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, his voice carrying the accent of someone born and raised in Texas. "Name's Wade Thornton. These are my associates." He gestured to the men flanking him. "That's my son Caleb on the left, and Silas Pike on the right." Emma studied them. Caleb was young, maybe 22, with the kind of restless energy that came from wanting to prove something. His hand kept drifting toward the gun on his hip, like he was practicing the draw in his mind. Silas Pike was older, late 50s, with the weathered calm of a man who'd seen enough violence that it no longer excited him. A professional. That made him more dangerous than the boy by a factor of 10. "Mr. Thornton," Emma acknowledged, "you're a ways from town." "I own the spread adjacent to yours," Wade said, making the word yours sound temporary. "Came by to welcome you to the neighborhood. Also came to discuss a matter of business." "I'm listening." Wade's eyes drifted past Emma to where Copper stood in the paddock. Something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe, or anger so old it had calcified into something harder. "That horse," he said, and his voice had gone flat. "He belonged to my brother, Victor Thornton." Victor's been dead 3 years come fall. That makes the horse part of his estate, part of my inheritance. The county sold me this property as is, Emma replied. Whatever was on it came with the deed. That's the law. The law. Wade smiled, but there was no warmth in it. The law says stolen property remains stolen even if it changes hands. That horse was never the county's to sell. He's mine by right. Emma felt her grip tighten on the rifle. You got papers proving ownership? I got something better than papers. I got the truth. That animal killed my brother. Stomped him to death in his own barn down in Amarillo. There were witnesses. There was blood. There was Victor's body with his skull crushed and horseshoe prints on his chest. Wade's voice had gone rough, like gravel dragged over broken glass. I've been looking for that horse for 3 years, and now I've found him. If he killed your brother, why hasn't he been put down? Emma asked. Why is he still alive? Because he ran, Caleb spoke up, his young voice sharp with anger. Killed Uncle Victor and ran like the coward animal he is. We've been tracking him ever since. Heard rumors he might be out here, came to see for ourselves. Emma looked at Copper. The stallion stood absolutely still, his eyes locked on Wade Thornton with an intensity that was almost visible. There was no fear in his posture, no submission, just a kind of watchful readiness, like a soldier who'd been in enough battles to know another one was coming. Tell me something, Emma said, looking back at Wade. If this horse killed your brother, if he's as dangerous as you claim, why do you want him? Why not just shoot him and be done? Wade's jaw worked for a moment before he answered. My brother and I, we didn't have much growing up. Our daddy beat us near daily. Victor took most of it, tried to protect me. When we got old enough, we built something together. A ranch, a business. We were going to make something of ourselves. He paused, and Emma saw genuine grief flicker across his weathered features. That horse was the best thing Victor ever owned, bred from champion stock, worth a fortune. Victor loved that animal like he'd never loved anything. And it killed him. Or maybe your brother did something to deserve what he got, Emma said quietly. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees despite the brutal heat. Caleb's hand moved toward his gun. Silas Pike shifted in his saddle, not threatening but ready. Wade's face went very still, very cold. You don't know what you're talking about, he said. I know what I see, Emma replied. I see a horse that's been beaten, whipped, burned, neglected. I see scars all over his body and that didn't come from rolling in pastures. So maybe before you stand there talking about justice and inheritance, you should ask yourself what your brother did to push an animal to fight back. Ma'am, you're new here. Silas Pike spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the patient tone of a school teacher explaining something to a slow child. So I'll make allowances, but you should understand the situation you're in. That horse is wanted in connection with a man's death. Mr. Thornton here has a legitimate claim. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to hand him over. Saves everyone a lot of trouble. And if I don't? Wade leaned forward in his saddle. Then I'll make you an offer. I'll pay you $50 for him. That's 50 times what you paid for this whole place. You can take the money, buy yourself some cattle, make a real go of this ranch instead of trying to survive on hope and stubbornness. He's not for sale. Be reasonable, Wade said, and now there was an edge to his voice. You're a woman alone out here, no husband, no help. Winter's coming in a few months. You got a broken down house, no livestock, and limited supplies. You really think you can make this work? You really want to die out here defending a horse you've known for all of 3 days? Emma felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. It was the same feeling she'd had back in Missouri, standing in her husband's study with a gun in her hand and his blood pooling on the floor. The moment when you realize that some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. That some stands have to be made, even when the odds say you'll lose. Mr. Thornton, she said, and her voice came out steady despite everything. I appreciate you riding out here. I appreciate the offer, but my answer is no. This is my land. That's my horse. You want him, you'll need to come through me to get him. For a long moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the wind moving through the prairie grass and the creak of saddle leather as one of the horses shifted its weight. Then Wade straightened in his saddle and touched his hat brim again. I'm sorry to hear that, ma'am, truly. I hoped we could settle this like civilized people. He gathered his reins. But one way or another, I'm getting what's mine. You'd best think hard on that. The three men turned to their horses and rode away, back toward town. Emma watched until they disappeared into the heat shimmer, then lowered her rifle with hands that wanted to shake but wouldn't. Not yet. Not while there was still light and work to be done. She walked out to the paddock where Copper waited. The stallion's eyes followed her approach, still wary but no longer actively hostile. Emma stopped at the fence and spoke quietly. "So that's Wade Thornton, the man who wants you dead." She studied the scars visible through Copper's copper hide. "Question is, did you really kill his brother? Or is that just the story he's telling himself?" Copper snorted and turned away, moving to the far side of the paddock. Emma took that as the only answer she was likely to get. That evening, after feeding both horses and herself, Emma went through the house more carefully than she had before. She was looking for something specific, and she found it under a loose floorboard in what had been the Harlow's bedroom. A journal, leather-bound and water-stained, its pages filled with cramped handwriting that spoke of long nights and growing fear. Emma carried it out to the porch where the last of the daylight would let her read. The journal belonged to Martha Harlow, the woman who'd fled this ranch 6 months ago with her family. The early entries were mundane: complaints about the heat, notes about repairs needed, observations about the land and what it might support. Then, about 3 months in, the tone changed. June 15th. Found the horse today. Big stallion, copper-colored, hiding in the back of the barn. Children wanted to approach, but I forbade it. There's something wrong with that animal. The way it watches, like it's waiting for something. June 22nd. The horse is still here. It doesn't run when we approach, but it doesn't come close either. My husband thinks we should report it to the sheriff. But report what? A horse living in our barn? They'd laugh us out of town. July 3rd. Strange things happening. Tools going missing. Gates left open, though I know I latched them. My husband's horse spooked so bad this morning it threw him. He broke 2 fingers. The copper horse just stood there watching. I swear it looks satisfied. July 18th. I don't sleep anymore. I hear things at night. Footsteps that aren't human. The children cry and say they see shadows moving. My husband thinks I'm going mad. Maybe I am. But I know what I see. That horse is watching us, studying us. It knows things. August 9th. My husband wanted to shoot the horse today. Took his rifle to the barn. Came back white as a sheet. Wouldn't speak for hours. Finally told me the horse had him cornered. Didn't attack, just stood there blocking the door, waiting. My husband dropped the rifle and backed out. The horse let him go. August 12th. I saw it last night. The copper horse standing over my daughter's bed. Just standing there in the moonlight, its head lowered, breathing. I screamed. It turned and looked at me with eyes that understood. That's when I knew we had to leave. Whatever that animal is, it's not natural. This land is cursed. The horse is cursed. We leave at dawn. The journal ended there. Emma sat on the porch as darkness fell, the pages resting in her lap, her mind working through what she'd read. Martha Harlow had been terrified of Copper, convinced he was something supernatural. But reading between the lines of fear and exhaustion, Emma saw something else. A horse that had learned to protect itself, to defend its territory, to survive. The part about standing over the daughter's bed bothered her until she remembered something. Horses were herd animals. They bonded. They protected. If Copper had been alone at this ranch for months or years, watching families come and go, maybe he'd been trying to connect, trying to protect. And the Harlows, in their fear, had interpreted it as threat. Or maybe Copper really was dangerous. Maybe he had killed Victor Thornton. Maybe Emma was making a fatal mistake trusting him. She was still sitting there, wrestling with doubt, when she heard movement from the paddock. Copper had come to the fence line closest to the house. He stood there in the starlight, his copper coat turned silver by the moon, his eyes reflecting light like an animal caught in a lantern beam. Watching her, waiting. Emma closed the journal and walked out to meet him. She stopped at the fence, close enough to touch if she reached out, which she didn't. Not yet. Martha Harlow wrote that you're cursed, Emma said quietly, that you're dangerous, that you were watching her children sleep. She paused. But I don't think that's the whole story. I think you were alone here. I think maybe you were trying to protect them, and they were too scared to see it. Copper's ears flicked toward her voice. Or maybe I'm wrong, Emma continued. Maybe you are dangerous. Maybe Wade's right and you killed Victor Thornton in cold blood. But here's what I know for certain. We're both survivors. We've both done things we're not proud of to stay alive, and we're both too stubborn to quit when we should. She reached out slowly, telegraphing her intention, giving Copper every chance to move away. Her hand crossed the fence line, hung in the space between them. An offering, a question. Copper stood absolutely still for what felt like an eternity. Then slowly, deliberately, he stretched his neck out and touched his nose to Emma's palm. His whiskers were soft against her calloused skin. His breath was warm. The contact lasted maybe 3 seconds before he pulled back. But those 3 seconds changed everything. Emma felt tears sting her eyes and didn't bother to hide them. Nobody was watching except a horse and the stars. "Thank you," she whispered. She went to bed that night with the journal under her pillow and her rifle within reach. But for the first time since arriving at Willow Creek Ranch, she felt something that might have been hope. Fragile, tentative, but real. The next morning, Emma woke to find fresh boot prints around the well. Someone had been there during the night again, close enough to the house that Emma should have heard them. The fact that she hadn't was disturbing. Either she'd been sleeping deeper than was safe, or whoever was coming knew how to move without making sound. She checked the well water, worried it might have been poison, but it seemed clean. Maybe that was the point, not to destroy, but to remind, to keep Emma looking over her shoulder, to make her understand that she was being watched, that she was vulnerable. Copper was agitated that morning, pacing the paddock, his tail lashing. Emma brought him feed and water, speaking in low, soothing tones, trying to calm both the horse and herself. She had decisions to make. Stay and fight for a piece of land that might get her killed, or cut her losses, take whatever she could carry, and move on. But even as she considered running, Emma knew she wouldn't. She was tired of running, tired of letting fear dictate her choices. She'd bought this ranch for $1 and found something here worth more than money. A purpose, a partner, a reason to stand. By mid-morning, Emma had made up her mind. If Wade Thornton wanted a fight, she'd give him one. But she couldn't do it alone. She needed allies, information, resources. She saddled Willow and prepared to ride back into Cottonwood Springs, leaving Copper in the paddock with enough feed and water to last the day. Before mounting up, she walked over to the fence one more time. "I'm going to town," she told the stallion, "going to see if there's anyone willing to help us. You stay here. Stay safe. Don't trust anyone who comes around while I'm gone." Copper watched her with those intelligent eyes, and Emma had the strange sense that he understood every word. She turned Willow toward town and didn't look back, though she could feel the weight of Copper's gaze following her until distance made it impossible. The ride to Cottonwood Springs took less time than the first journey, now that Emma knew the way. The town looked the same as it had days ago. Same dusty streets, same weathered buildings, same sense of impermanence. Like everything here was just temporary, waiting for the next drought or economic collapse to blow it all away. Emma tied Willow outside the general store and pushed through the door, into blessed coolness. The proprietor, the same man who'd been there on her first visit, looked up from where he was restocking shelves. Recognition flickered across his face. "You're the woman who bought the Willow Creek, are you?" "Willow Creek place," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am, Emma Carson." "Samuel Mitchell," the man replied, wiping his hands on his apron. "Though most folks just call me Sam. You settling in all right out there?" "Depends on your definition of all right," Emma said. She glanced around the store, making sure they were alone. "I need to ask you some questions about Wade Thornton, about his brother Victor, about what really happened." Sam's expression grew guarded. "That's dangerous talk, Miss Carson." "I'm already in danger," Emma replied. "Wade came out to my place yesterday, threatened me, said he wants the horse that's living in my barn, claims it killed his brother. And you want to know if that's true. I want to know the whole truth, not the version Wade's been telling himself for 3 years." Sam studied her for a long moment, then walked to the front door and flipped the sign to closed. He gestured toward a chair near the potbelly stove that wouldn't be lit until winter. "Sit. This isn't a short story." Emma sat. Sam settled into another chair with a sigh that spoke of old bones and older regrets. "Victor Thornton wasn't a bad man," Sam began. "Not at first, anyway. He and Wade came to this area about 15 years ago with nothing but ambition and each other. Built a ranch from scratch. Worked hard. By all accounts, they were making something of themselves." He paused. "Then Victor got involved in illegal horse racing. Big money races, the kind where men bet everything they own on a single animal. Victor bought himself a stallion, copper-colored, beautiful animal, paid a fortune for it. Copper, Emma said quietly. Sam nodded. That's what folks called him. Victor ran him hard, too hard. The horse won race after race, but Victor kept pushing. Wanted more, needed more, because he'd gotten himself into debt, gambling debt, the kind that gets you killed if you can't pay. So he abused the horse to make money. Worse than that, Sam said, and his voice went heavy. Last race Victor ran, the horse was sick, injured, shouldn't have been anywhere near a track, but Victor needed the win so bad he didn't care. The horse ran anyway because that's what horses do. They give you everything they have, and then they try to give more. Copper won that race, collapsed right after crossing the finish line, should have died right there. Emma felt sick, but he didn't. No, Victor got him back to the barn somehow. Folks say he was celebrating, drunk on whiskey in relief. Went out to the barn that night to check on his champion. What happened next, nobody knows for sure. But they found Victor the next morning, dead. Skull fractured. Copper was gone. Wade says the horse murdered him. Wade needs to believe that, Sam replied, because the alternative is accepting that his brother drove an animal to the point where fighting back was the only option left. It's easier to hate a killer than to acknowledge that Victor made his own choices and died because of them. Emma sat with that for a moment. There was a U.S. Marshal, Caleb Jennings. He came looking for the horse 6 months ago. He never came back. Sam's face went grim. I heard about that. Jennings was a good man, careful, thorough. If he didn't come back, there's a reason. He leaned forward. Miss Carson, I'm going to give you some advice. That horse has a target on him. Wade won't stop until he gets what he wants. And what Wade wants is vengeance. You stay in the middle of that, you're going to get hurt. Possibly killed. I'm not leaving, Emma said. Then you're going to need help. That's why I'm here. Sam studied her again, his weathered face creasing with something that might have been respect. There are a few of us in this town who don't care for Wade Thornton's methods. Men who've seen enough injustice that we're getting tired of looking the other way. I can talk to them. See if they'd be willing to stand with you when the time comes. Why would you do that? Emma asked. You don't know me. No, Sam agreed, but I knew Victor Thornton, watched him destroy himself and everyone around him. And I stood by and did nothing because it wasn't my business. I've carried that weight for 3 years. He stood, his knees popping. Sometimes you get a chance to do better, to stand for something that matters. I'd like to take that chance, if you'll let me. Emma felt something loosen in her chest, the tight knot of isolation that had been there since Missouri. I'd appreciate that, Mr. Mitchell. Sam, he corrected. And Miss Carson, that horse you're protecting? If even half the stories are true, he's been through hell and survived. That makes him stronger than most men I know. Don't underestimate him, but don't trust him completely either. Trauma changes things, makes them unpredictable. I'll keep that in mind. Emma left the general store with Sam's promise to gather allies and a list of supplies she could purchase on credit. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd had that morning. She was untying Willow when she heard a voice behind her. Miss Carson. Emma turned to find Caleb Thornton standing 10 feet away, his young face set in hard lines. Her hand moved toward her gun, but Caleb held up both hands, showing they were empty. I'm not here to cause trouble, he said. I just need to tell you something. I'm listening. My father, he's a good man, but he's been broken since Uncle Victor died. It's like something inside him shattered and never healed right. Caleb's voice was rough with emotion. He loved his brother more than anything in this world. And when that horse killed him, it killed part of my father too. Your uncle made choices, Emma said quietly. He pushed that horse beyond endurance. What happened was tragic, but it wasn't murder. You don't know that, Caleb shot back. You weren't there. You didn't see Uncle Victor's body. You didn't watch my father grieve. He took a step closer. I'm telling you this because I don't want to see anyone else get hurt. Give us the horse. Take the money. Walk away. Please. And if I don't, Caleb's jaw tightened. Then my father will do what he thinks he has to do, and I'll stand with him because that's what family does. Emma met the young man's eyes and saw genuine anguish there. He didn't want this fight, but he'd see it through because loyalty demanded it. She understood that, respected it even, but it didn't change her answer. I'm sorry, Caleb, I truly am, but I'm not giving up that horse. He's been through enough. Caleb nodded slowly like he'd expected nothing else. Then I guess we'll see each other again, under worse circumstances. He turned and walked away, his shoulders carrying the weight of a choice he hadn't wanted to make. Emma rode back to Willow Creek Ranch as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. The land stretched out around her in shades of gold and amber, beautiful and harsh in equal measure. This was Texas. This was the frontier. This was a place where you fought for what you claimed or lost it to someone willing to fight harder. She was still a mile from the ranch when she saw the smoke. Black, thick, rising from the direction of her property like a signal fire announcing the end of something. Emma kicked Willow into a gallop, her heart hammering, her mind racing through terrible possibilities. The house, the barn, copper. She crested the final rise and saw it. Not the house or barn, but the paddock. The fence posts were burning, the wood blackened and crackling. And in the center of the paddock, untouched by flames, stood Copper. His copper coat reflected the fire's light, making him look like he was forged from the flames themselves. Emma leaped from Willow's back and ran for the well, grabbing buckets, hauling water. The fire was contained to the fence line. Deliberate, controlled, a message written in smoke and in ash. She could put it out before it spread, but that wasn't the point. The point was Wade Thornton had been here, on her land, while she was gone, and he'd made his intentions clear. She spent 2 hours putting out the fire and checking for other damage. The house was untouched. The barn was fine. Nothing had been stolen or destroyed beyond the fence. But Copper was rattled, pacing, his eyes wild. Emma approached him slowly, speaking in low tones, trying to calm him. "I know," she said softly. "I know you're scared. So am I. But we're still here. We're still standing." Copper let her touch him for the first time since that brief contact at the fence the night before. Her hand on his neck, his body trembling beneath her palm, two damaged souls finding comfort in shared danger. As darkness fell and Emma stood in her burned paddock with one hand on a traumatized horse, she understood that this was only the beginning. Wade Thornton had declared war. The question now wasn't whether blood would be spilled, but whose and how much, and whether any of them would survive what was coming. Emma looked up at the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky and made herself a promise. She would protect Copper. She would hold this land, and she would face whatever came with the same stubborn determination that had kept her alive this long. Because sometimes the only way out is through, and sometimes the fight you didn't choose is the fight that defines you. The war for Willow Creek Ranch was no longer coming. It was here. The days after the paddock burning settled into a rhythm of constant vigilance. Emma slept in shifts, never more than 2 hours at a time, always with her rifle within arm's reach and one ear tuned to the sounds of the night. Copper had become her early warning system. The stallion would tense, his ears swiveling toward danger long before Emma's duller human senses could detect anything wrong. Together they formed an alliance born of necessity and sealed with shared fear. Sam Mitchell arrived on the third day after the fire, driving a wagon loaded with supplies and accompanied by 3 men Emma had never seen before. They looked like what they were: survivors of violence who'd learned to live with the weight of it. The kind of men who understood that sometimes the only way to atone for past sins was to prevent future ones. Sam made the introductions in the yard between the house and the burned paddock, his voice carrying the formality of a man presenting credentials. "Miss Carson, these are the men I told you about: Jacob Hayes, Doc Harrison, and Thomas Crawford. Most folks call him Bull." Jacob Hayes was maybe 58, lean and weathered, with an eye patch covering his left eye and hands that moved with the careful precision of someone who'd learned to compensate for compromised vision. Doc Harrison looked older, late 60s, with the gentle manner of a healer and eyes that had seen too much suffering. Bull Crawford was massive, broad across the shoulders like an ox, with gray threading through his dark hair and a quiet stillness that suggested controlled power. Emma stepped off the porch to greet them, aware that she was being evaluated just as much as she was evaluating. These men didn't know her, had no reason to trust her. The fact that they'd come at all said something about Sam Mitchell's reputation and their own need for redemption. "Gentlemen," Emma said, "I appreciate you coming, though I should be honest, I don't have money to pay you." "We're not here for money," Jacob replied, his voice rough as gravel. "Sam says you're fighting Wade Thornton over a horse. Says Thornton's in the wrong, but has the power to make wrong look right. We know something about that." "We've all got our reasons for being here," Bull added, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. None of them have to do with payment. Doc Harrison moved past the introductions toward the paddock where Copper stood watching the proceedings with wary intelligence. "May I?" he asked Emma, gesturing toward the stallion. "You can try," Emma replied. "He's not friendly with strangers." Doc approached the fence with the slow, measured movements of someone who'd spent a lifetime working with frightened animals. He didn't try to touch Copper, just stood there studying him with a professional eye. After a long moment, he turned back to the group. "That horse has been through hell," Doc said flatly. "Old whip scars, burn marks, evidence of malnutrition and neglect. Whatever else might be true about him, he's been abused systematically and over a long period." He met Emma's eyes. "You were right to protect him." "Wade says the horse killed his brother," Emma said. "I'm not entirely sure that's not true." "Probably is true," Jacob said, surprising her. "Question is, did he have cause? Man pushes an animal far enough, the animal's going to push back. That's nature. That's survival." Sam began unloading supplies from the wagon. Lumber for rebuilding the paddock fence. Nails, tools, food staples that would keep Emma fed for weeks. "We figured you'd need help fortifying this place," he explained. "Thornton's made his move with the fire. Next time he'll come harder." "Next time he might come with enough men to overwhelm us," Emma said. "Which is why we're here," Bo replied. "To make sure that when he comes, he finds more than he bargained for." They worked through the afternoon, rebuilding the burned fence sections and reinforcing weak points around the property. Emma found herself working alongside men who moved with the efficiency of soldiers who'd built fortifications under fire. They didn't waste motion or words. They just worked, and the property slowly transformed from vulnerable to defensible. During a break for water, Emma found herself standing next to Jacob Hayes. The man drank deeply, then spoke without looking at her. "Sam tells me you killed a man once, back in Missouri." Emma went very still. "Sam talks too much." "Sam talks exactly enough," Jacob corrected. "I needed to know if you'd stand when the shooting started. Woman who's already killed to defend herself, she knows what that weight feels like. She won't freeze." "You seem awfully sure about that." "I was a sniper in the war," Jacob said quietly. "Killed more men than I can count. Most of them never saw it coming. Just doing their duty, and then they were dead because I was good at my job." He finally turned to look at her with his one good eye. "I know what it's like to carry that weight, to wonder if you're damned for what you've done. But I also know the difference between killing because you have to and killing because you want to. You're the first kind, so am I. So are the men here with me. And that's supposed to make us better?" "No," Jacob replied. "Just means we understand the cost. And we're willing to pay it again if we have to." As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded Emma of the paddock fire, the men prepared to leave. They'd be back, they promised. When Wade made his next move, Emma wouldn't face it alone. The knowledge should have been comforting. Instead, Emma felt the weight of responsibility settling heavier on her shoulders. These men were putting themselves in danger for her. For Copper. If any of them died, that blood would be on her hands. After they left, Emma walked out to the rebuilt paddock where Copper stood. The stallion had watched the day's activities with cautious interest, never approaching the strangers, but clearly aware of every movement, every voice, every potential threat. Now, in the quiet after the men's departure, he moved to the fence where Emma waited. "They came to help us," Emma said softly. "Good men who've done bad things, trying to do better. Kind of like us, I guess." Copper pushed his nose against her shoulder, a gesture that was becoming familiar. Emma reached up to stroke his neck, feeling the powerful muscles beneath the copper hide, the scars that mapped a history of pain. "What really happened with Victor Thornton?" she asked, not expecting an answer. "Did you mean to kill him? Or was it an accident? Self-defense?" The horse couldn't answer, but Emma found herself remembering Martha Harlow's journal. The fear, the paranoia, the sense of being watched by something that understood too much. Emma had dismissed it as hysteria, but standing here in the gathering darkness with a horse who seemed almost human in his awareness, she wondered. She spent that evening inside the house, trying to make it more livable. She'd swept and scrubbed until her hands were raw, but the place still felt haunted by the families who'd fled. Their possessions remained like archaeological evidence. A child's doll in the corner, a man's work shirt hanging on a peg, a woman's hairbrush on a shelf. Emma gathered these remnants and put them in a box, tucking it away in a corner. erasing the ghosts even though she knew they'd never really leave. She was banking the fire in the stove when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Not the wind or the usual night noises, but something deliberate. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving around the house in the darkness. Emma grabbed her rifle and moved to the window, staying back from the glass, where she wouldn't be silhouetted against the lamplight. She could see shadows moving in the yard, 3, maybe 4 figures, staying low, communicating with hand signals that suggested military training or at least criminal experience. Her first thought was Wade Thornton had come back, but something about this felt different, more professional, more dangerous. These weren't ranchers making a point. These were men who knew how to move in the dark with purpose. Emma extinguished the lamp, plunging the house into darkness, and moved to a different window. From this angle, she could see one of the figures more clearly. Tall, lean, moving with the careful precision of someone who'd done this before. The moonlight caught his face for just a moment, and Emma's blood ran cold. She knew that face, not personally, but from wanted posters she'd seen in a dozen different towns. A bounty hunter named Silas Pike, the man who'd been with Wade Thornton during his first visit. Pike had a reputation. He took jobs other men wouldn't touch, found people who didn't want to be found, collected bounties on individuals both living and dead, with a rumored preference for dead because corpses didn't argue about payment. If Pike was here, he wasn't alone, and he wasn't here to talk. Emma moved to the back door, the one that opened onto the space between the house and the barn. She needed to get to Copper, needed to make sure the stallion was safe, but the moment she touched the door handle, gunfire erupted. Not aimed at her, aimed at the barn. The sharp crack of rifle fire splitting the night, followed by the splintering of wood as bullets punched through the barn walls. Emma's heart stopped. They were shooting at Copper, trying to kill him while he was trapped inside. She threw open the door and ran, no longer caring about her own safety, driven by a fury that burned hotter than fear. The rifle in her hands came up as she ran, and she fired at the muzzle flash from one of the shooters. Didn't know if she hit anything, didn't care, just needed to draw their attention away from the barn. It worked. Gunfire swung toward her. Bullets kicked up dirt at her feet, whined past her head close enough that she felt the displacement of air. Emma dove behind the water trough, returning fire, trying to count shooters by their muzzle flashes. At least 4, maybe 5. Too many to fight alone in the open. Then the barn doors exploded outward. Copper burst through in a storm of splintered wood and primal rage. The stallion had been trapped, shot at, terrorized, and something in him had snapped. He went straight for the nearest shooter, a man Emma didn't recognize who'd been reloading behind a pile of cut firewood. The man saw Copper coming and tried to run. Didn't make it 3 steps. Copper hit him like a battering ram, 1,600 pounds of muscle and fury moving at full gallop. The impact sent the man flying. He landed hard, didn't move again. Emma didn't know if he was dead or unconscious and didn't have time to care because the other shooters were scattering, trying to get to their horses, suddenly more concerned with survival than assassination. Emma fired twice more, forcing one man to abandon his attempt to mount up. Copper wheeled and charged again, and this time the men broke completely. They ran for their horses, mounted in panic haste, and fled into the darkness. The whole attack had lasted maybe 3 minutes. It felt like hours. In the sudden silence that followed, Emma stayed behind the water trough, her rifle ready, waiting for a second wave that didn't come. Copper stood in the center of the yard, his sides heaving, his eyes wild, his copper coat dark with sweat and splattered with blood that might have been his own or the man he'd struck. Emma approached slowly, speaking in low tones. "Easy, boy, easy. They're gone. You're safe." The stallion's eyes found her in the darkness, and slowly, incrementally, the wildness faded, replaced by something else. Trust, recognition, partnership. Copper had just killed or seriously injured a man defending their shared territory. There was no going back from that. No more pretending he was just a horse or that Emma was just providing temporary shelter. They were bound now by violence and blood and the simple fact that they'd fought together and survived. Emma spent the next hour checking Copper for injuries, running her hands over every inch of his body by lamplight in what remained of the barn. She found 3 shallow grazing wounds where bullets had passed close enough to split skin but hadn't penetrated deeply. She cleaned and bandaged them as best she could with the limited supplies she had, speaking continuously in that low, soothing voice that seemed to calm both of them. The man Copper had struck lay in the yard where he'd fallen. Emma approached cautiously, her rifle ready, and rolled him over with her boot. He was breathing barely, his chest rising and falling in shallow, irregular gasps. Blood ran from his nose and ears. Internal injuries. Serious ones. This man needed a doctor. Needed help Emma wasn't equipped to provide. She was trying to decide what to do when she heard horses approaching. Multiple riders, moving fast. Emma's hand went to her gun, prepared for another attack, but then she heard Sam Mitchell's voice calling out. "Miss Carson, we heard gunfire. Are you hurt?" Sam and the others rode into the yard, their faces grim in the lamplight Emma had set on the porch. They took in the scene quickly. The damaged barn, the wounded man on the ground, Copper standing protectively near Emma, his copper coat still marked with blood. "What happened?" Jacob Hayes asked, dismounting. Emma explained in short, clipped sentences. The attack, the shooting, Copper's charge, the men fleeing. As she talked, Doc Harrison moved to examine the wounded man on the ground. "He's in bad shape," Doc said after a moment. "Multiple broken ribs, possible internal bleeding, skull fracture. He needs proper medical care or he'll die." "That's Silas Pike's cousin," Bull Crawford said, his voice heavy. "Martin Pike, small-time enforcer. Does wet work for whoever pays." He looked at Emma. "Pike was here?" "I saw him," Emma confirmed. "He was directing the others." Sam's face went hard as stone. "This wasn't Wade. This was a professional hit. Someone paid Pike to kill that horse, and probably you too if you got in the way." "Wade has money," Jacob said, "enough to hire Pike and his crew." "We need to get Martin to a doctor," Doc insisted. "Whatever he's done, I can't just let him die." They loaded the unconscious man into Sam's wagon, handling him as gently as circumstances allowed. Bull and Jacob volunteered to take him into town, to the only doctor who wouldn't ask too many questions. That left Sam and Doc with Emma, standing in the wreckage of her yard, surrounded by evidence of attempted murder. "This changes things," Sam said quietly. "Pike doesn't give up. He'll come back, probably with more men, better prepared." "Let him come," Emma replied, and her voice carried a cold hardness that surprised even her. "I'm done running, done backing down. This is my land. That's my horse. Anyone who wants either one is going to have to go through me." Sam studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, then we fortify, we prepare, and we make sure that when Pike comes back, we're ready." They spent what remained of the night boarding up the barn, moving Copper to a more defensible position, and setting up a rotation for watch duty. Sam and Doc would stay at the ranch, sleeping in shifts, making sure Emma and Copper were never alone. It should have felt like an imposition, like weakness that she needed protecting. Instead, it felt like what Jacob had said earlier. Men doing better, trying to atone. Just before dawn, as the sky began to lighten in the east and the stars faded one by one, Emma found herself standing at the fence with Copper. The stallion was calm now, the battle fury burned away, leaving behind the quiet intelligence she'd come to recognize. "You saved my life tonight," Emma said softly. "You didn't have to. Could have run, should have run, probably, but you stayed and fought." Copper lowered his head and Emma scratched behind his ears, a gesture of intimacy that would have been impossible just days ago. "I need to tell you something," she continued, "about why I came here, about what I'm running from." She took a breath and let the words come, words she'd never spoken aloud to anyone. "My name wasn't always Emma Carson. It was Emma Hartwell. I was married to a man named Marcus. He was wealthy, respectable, and behind closed doors, he was a monster. He beat me, controlled me, made me feel like I was nothing." Copper's ears flicked toward her voice, listening. "I endured it for 5 years. Thought it was my fault somehow, that I deserved it. Then one night, Marcus came home drunk, angrier than usual. He had a gun, said he was tired of me, tired of pretending. He was going to kill me and tell people it was an accident." Emma's voice went flat, emotionless, as she recounted the worst night of her life. "We fought. I got the gun away from him and I shot him. 3 times, made sure he was dead." The confession hung in the air between them. Emma had never told anyone the full truth. The court had accepted self-defense. The evidence of Marcus's abuse had been overwhelming. But Emma knew the reality was more complicated. She'd had the gun. Marcus was on the ground. She could have stopped after the first shot. She'd chosen to keep shooting, chosen to make absolutely certain he could never hurt her again. The law called it justified, Emma continued, but the town called me a murderer, a woman who killed her husband. I couldn't stay, so I ran, changed my name, kept moving, until I found this place and a horse who'd been pushed beyond endurance by a man who didn't care about anything except what he could take. She looked at Copper, into those amber eyes that seemed to understand everything. We're the same, you and I. We both killed to survive. We both carry that weight. And we're both trying to find a place where we can live with what we've done. Copper didn't react, didn't pull away, just stood there accepting her confession, her truth, her darkness. And in that acceptance, Emma felt something loosen in her chest. The knot of guilt and shame she'd carried for 5 years didn't disappear, but it became bearable, shared. The sun broke over the horizon, painting the Texas landscape in gold and amber. A new day, another chance to stand, to fight, to survive. Emma rested her forehead against Copper's neck and felt the steady rhythm of his breathing, the solid reality of his presence. We're going to get through this, she promised. Whatever comes, we face it together. 2 days later, Emma made a trip into Cottonwood Springs. She needed supplies, needed information, and needed to send a message to Wade Thornton. Sam accompanied her, driving the wagon while Emma rode Copper for the first time. The stallion had accepted saddle and bridle with surprising calm, as if he understood the necessity. Or maybe he'd been well-trained once, before Victor Thornton broke something in him. The ride revealed what Doc Harrison had suspected. Copper had a slight limp in his left front leg, probably from an old injury that had never healed properly. It didn't slow him much, but it was noticeable. A reminder of the damage that lingered long after the original violence had ended. Cottonwood Springs looked the same as always. Same dusty streets, same weathered buildings. But the people who saw Emma riding Copper stopped and stared. Word had spread about the attack, about Silas Pike's cousin being carried into town more dead than alive, about the Copper horse that had struck like a demon protecting his territory. Emma tied Copper outside the general store and went inside. The usual customers fell silent as she entered, their eyes tracking her movement. She ignored them, moving to the counter, where Sam had already begun placing an order for supplies. While Sam dealt with the merchant, Emma's attention was drawn to a conversation happening near the potbelly stove. 3 men speaking in voices just loud enough to be overheard. "Heard Martin Pike might not make it," one said. "Doc says his skull's fractured. Internal bleeding. Could die any day." "That horse is a killer," another replied. "Needs to be put down before someone else gets hurt." "Wade Thornton's been saying that for years," the third man added. "Maybe it's time we listened." Emma turned to face them, her voice cutting through the store like a blade. "That horse defended his home against armed men who came in the dark to kill him. That's not murder. That's survival." The 3 men looked at her, their expressions ranging from hostility to discomfort. The first one, a heavy-set rancher Emma didn't know, stood up. "You saying Martin Pike deserved what happened to him?" "I'm saying actions have consequences," Emma replied. "Pike and his crew came onto my property, shot up my barn, tried to kill my horse. Copper fought back. If Pike's cousin dies, that blood is on Pike's hands, not mine." "You're protecting a killer," the rancher said. "That makes you complicit. And you're judging a situation you know nothing about," Emma shot back. "That horse was abused for years, beaten, starved, pushed to the breaking point by Victor Thornton's greed. When he finally fought back, Victor died. That's not murder. That's cause and effect." The store had gone completely silent. Every eye was on Emma, and she realized this was the moment that would define how the town saw her. Victim or troublemaker. Defender of the abused or protector of a killer. "I know what it's like," Emma said, and her voice carried the weight of her own history. "To be pushed so far that fighting back is the only option left. To make a choice between dying or doing something you can never take back. Some of you might call that murder. I call it survival, and I won't apologize for it." She turned back to the counter, the conversation clearly over. Sam finished the supply order in silence, and they loaded the wagon without further incident. But Emma could feel the weight of eyes on her back, the judgment and speculation and fear that followed her out of the store. They were preparing to leave when Wade Thornton appeared on the street, flanked by Caleb and 2 men Emma didn't recognize. Wade's face was haggard, aged by grief and rage and sleepless nights. He looked at Copper, and something twisted in his expression. "You should have sold him when you had the chance," Wade said, his voice rough. "Now Martin Pike's dying because of that animal." Martin Pike is dying because you hired him to commit murder, Emma replied. Don't blame the horse for defending himself. That horse killed my brother, Wade said, and the pain in his voice was real and raw. Victor was all I had, and that demon took him from me. Your brother abused that horse for years, Emma said, and she kept her voice gentle despite the anger burning in her chest. He ran him sick and injured, pushed him beyond endurance. What happened was tragic, but Victor made his choices. The horse just reacted. Wade's hand moved toward his gun, and Emma's hand moved toward hers. For a moment, the street held its breath. Then Caleb stepped between them, his young face desperate. Pa, don't, Caleb said. Not here, not like this. Wade's hand fell away from his weapon, but his eyes never left Copper. That horse dies, he said flatly. One way or another, it's only a matter of time. Then you'd better bring an army, Emma replied, because I won't go down easy. Wade turned and walked away, his son following, leaving Emma standing in the street with her hand still hovering near her gun and her heart hammering against her ribs. Sam touched her elbow gently. We should go, he said quietly, before this gets worse. They rode back to the ranch in silence, Emma on Copper and Sam driving the wagon. The confrontation had established the battle lines. No more threats, no more warnings, just the cold certainty that violence was coming and only one side would walk away when it was done. That night, Emma sat on her porch with a cup of coffee gone cold in her hands and watched Copper graze in the moonlight. The stallion moved by it with a kind of calm that belied everything he'd been through, as if he'd made peace with his nature, with his history, with the violence that seemed to follow him like a shadow. Emma understood that feeling. She'd killed Marcus Carson 5 years ago, and she'd carry that weight until the day she died. But she'd also survived, built something from the ashes of her old life, found purpose in protecting something more vulnerable than herself. We're going to war, Emma said aloud, though no one but Copper could hear. Real war. People are going to die. Maybe us, maybe them. Probably both. Copper raised his head from grazing and looked at her across the distance, his copper coat silver in the moonlight, his eyes reflecting starlight like mirrors. But we're not backing down, Emma continued. Not this time. This is our ground, our home, and we defend it. The horse returned to grazing, accepting her declaration with the same calm acceptance he showed everything. And Emma sat on her porch drinking cold coffee and watching the stars, waiting for the storm she knew was coming. Because some fights can't be avoided, some stands have to be made, and sometimes the only way to find peace is to fight for it with everything you have, knowing you might lose everything in the process. The war for Willow Creek Ranch was no longer a possibility. It was an inevitability. And Emma Carson, the woman who'd killed her husband and changed her name and bought a cursed ranch for $1, was ready for it. Or as ready as anyone could be for the kind of violence that destroys lives and reshapes souls. The kind of violence she and Copper both knew too well. The kind that was coming whether they were ready or not. Martin Pike died 3 days after the attack. Doc Harrison brought the news to the ranch at dawn, his weathered face grave with the weight of it. The man had never regained consciousness, had simply faded away as his injuries overwhelmed whatever fighting spirit had kept him alive this long. With his death, the situation shifted from conflict to blood feud. Pike family justice was coming, and it wouldn't be measured or reasonable. Emma received the news standing in the yard with her hands covered in dirt from the morning chores. She felt nothing at first. No guilt, no satisfaction, just a hollow acknowledgement that one more person had died in the spiral of violence that seemed to follow her like a curse. Then she thought about Copper, about the moment the stallion had charged to protect their shared ground, and she felt something harden in her chest. Resolve, maybe, or just the acceptance that some prices had to be paid. How long do we have? She asked Doc. Silas Pike rode out of town last night, Doc replied. Didn't say where he was going, but a man doesn't leave after his cousin dies unless he's gathering reinforcements or preparing for war. My guess is both. He paused, his old eyes troubled. Sam heard Pike was headed to New Mexico. Got connections there. Men who will kill for the right price. He'll be back, Miss Carson, and when he comes, it'll be with enough guns to finish this. Then we prepare for war too. The Brotherhood arrived within hours of Doc's warning. Sam Mitchell, Jacob Hayes, and Bull Crawford rode in with supplies and weapons, their faces set with the grim determination of men who'd seen this kind of thing before. They moved with military efficiency, transforming the ranch from a homestead into a fortress. Barricades went up. Fields of fire were established. Ammunition was counted and distributed. The house became a command post. The barn became a stronghold. Emma found herself in the center of it all, no longer just defending her property, but commanding a small force of men who had decided her fight was worth dying for. The responsibility sat heavy on her shoulders, heavier than the rifle she carried or the pistol at her hip. These men had families, histories, lives beyond this dusty ranch in the middle of nowhere. If they died here, that would be on her conscience along with everything else. Bull Crawford seemed to sense her thoughts. He found her on the porch as the sun climbed toward noon, checking her rifle for the third time in an hour. "You're thinking about sending us away," he said. It wasn't a question. "You don't owe me anything," Emma replied. "This isn't your fight." "You're wrong about that." Bull settled his massive frame against the porch railing. "I commanded a cavalry unit during the war, made a decision that got 32 men killed. Good men. Men who trusted me." His voice went distant. "I've spent 20 years trying to make that right, trying to find a way to balance those scales. This fight, protecting you and that horse from men who think power makes them righteous, this is as close as I've come. We might all die." "Everyone dies," Bull said simply. "Question is whether you die for something that matters." "I've decided this matters." Jacob Hayes joined them, his one good eye scanning the horizon out of habit. "Movement on the North Ridge," he reported. "Single rider. Not approaching, just watching." "Scout," Bull said. "Pike's mapping our defenses. He'll come tonight or tomorrow night. Won't wait longer than that." Emma felt her pulse quicken. "How many do you think he'll bring?" 10 at minimum," Jacob replied. "Maybe 15. Pike has money and connections. He can hire every drifter and gun hand within 50 miles if he's willing to pay." "We're 5, Emma said. 6 if you count Copper." "I do count him," Jacob said. "That horse is worth 3 men in a fight. He's fast, smart, and mean when he needs to be. Plus he'll create chaos. Horses are prey animals. They spook. A stallion charging into a group of mounted men will scatter them like leaves." They spent the afternoon running drills. Emma had never been a soldier, but she learned fast. Fields of fire, fallback positions, hand signals for when sound would give away their position. The Brotherhood moved like they'd done this 100 times before, their movements synchronized by years of shared violence and survival. Copper watched from the paddock with that eerie intelligence Emma had come to recognize. The stallion seemed to understand that something was coming, that the tension crackling through the air meant danger. He paced the fence line, his muscles coiled tight, his ears constantly swiveling to catch sounds humans couldn't hear. As sunset approached, Sam pulled Emma aside. His weathered face showed every one of his 62 years, creased by wind and worry and too many hard decisions. "There's something you need to know," he said quietly. "About me. About why I'm really here." Emma waited, sensing confession in his tone. "I wasn't always a shopkeeper," Sam continued. "During the war, I rode with Confederate irregulars. We did things, terrible things, burned towns, killed civilians, told ourselves it was for the cause, but really it was just violence dressed up as duty." He met her eyes. "There was a town in Arkansas, small place, barely on the maps. We were ordered to burn it, deny the Union any resources. I was 23 years old and followed orders without question." "What happened?" "There were people in the buildings when we set the fires. Families, children. We didn't know, or maybe we didn't ask because we didn't want to know." Sam's voice cracked. 17 people died. I can still hear them screaming when I close my eyes." Emma felt the weight of his confessions settle between them. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because tomorrow night we're probably going to kill people," Sam said. "And I need you to understand that it never gets easier, that every life you take stays with you. But sometimes you have to do it anyway, to protect something worth protecting." "You think Copper's worth killing for?" "I think what you're doing here matters," Sam replied. "Standing up to men who believe power gives them the right to take whatever they want. That's worth fighting for, worth dying for if it comes to that." Night fell with the weight of inevitability. The Brotherhood took positions according to the plan they'd rehearsed. Jacob in the barn loft with his rifle, one eye and steady hands that could drop a man at 200 yards. Bull in the house, covering the approach from the road. Sam and Doc in concealed positions flanking the paddock where Copper waited. Emma split her time between positions, coordinating, checking, trying to be everywhere at once because sitting still meant thinking and thinking meant fear. She was checking ammunition in the house when Bull spoke without taking his eyes from the window. You ever wonder if we're the bad guys in this? Emma looked up. What? Wade Thornton lost his brother, Bull said. From his perspective, he's seeking justice. Pike lost his cousin. The men who'll come tonight, they're probably not all killers. Some of them are just cowboys trying to make a dollar, and we're going to shoot them. They're coming to kill Copper, Emma replied, to take my land. They made their choice. So did we, Bull agreed, just making sure we're clear on what that means. The attack came at midnight, announced by the thunder of hoofbeats and the sharp crack of gunfire. Not a subtle infiltration this time, but an assault, overwhelming force meant to crush resistance through sheer numbers. Emma counted muzzle flashes as she returned fire from the house window. 12, 15, maybe more. Too many to fight in the open, exactly as Jacob had predicted. The first wave hit the barricades they'd erected around the paddock. Riders on horseback, shooting as they came, trying to get close enough to set fires or kill Copper directly. Jacob's rifle spoke from the barn loft, precise and deadly. One rider fell, then another. The attackers scattered, realizing they were taking fire from multiple positions. Bull's shotgun roared from inside the house, dropping a man who'd gotten too close to the porch. The blast lit up the night like lightning, momentarily freezing everyone in its glare. Emma used that moment to sight on another target, fired, saw the man jerk and fall from his saddle. Then Copper entered the fight. The stallion had been growing increasingly agitated as the gunfire intensified, pacing the paddock, his body language screaming readiness. When a group of 3 riders broke through the first line of defense and made directly for him, something in Copper snapped. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He charged. 1,600 pounds of muscle and fury moving at full gallop is a force of nature. Copper hit the first rider's horse like a battering ram, sending both horse and rider tumbling to the ground. The second rider tried to wheel away, but Copper was faster. The stallion's teeth found the man's leg, dragging him from the saddle. The third rider opened fire, bullets kicking up dirt around Copper's hooves, one grazing the stallion's shoulder but not stopping him. Emma watched in horrified awe as Copper fought like a warhorse from some ancient battlefield, all hooves and teeth and strategic violence. The stallion wasn't just defending himself. He was actively hunting the men who'd come to kill him, turning prey into predator. Sweet Jesus, Bull muttered beside her. That's not a horse. That's a demon in horse form. The attackers' cohesion broke. Horses were bolting, riders were scattered, and the organized assault had devolved into chaos. That's when Emma saw him. Wade Thornton, sitting his horse at the edge of the firelight, watching the battle unfold with an expression of such profound grief that Emma felt it like a physical blow. Wade wasn't directing the attack. He was just there, watching the horse that had killed his brother prove capable of so much more violence, watching his mission of vengeance fall apart in blood and screaming horses. And something in his face said he knew this was wrong, but couldn't stop it because stopping meant admitting everything he'd done for the past 3 years had been for nothing. Unverton. Then Caleb appeared next to his father. The young man was shouting something Emma couldn't hear over the gunfire, gesturing frantically. Wade shook his head, his face set with stubborn grief. Caleb grabbed his father's arm. Wade shook him off. And Caleb, with the desperation of a son trying to save his father from himself, did something that changed everything. He shot Wade, not a killing shot. The bullet took Wade in the shoulder, spinning him in the saddle but not dropping him. Emma saw the moment of absolute shock on Wade's face, the incomprehension that his own son had just shot him. Then Caleb was shouting, his voice cutting through the chaos. Stop! Everyone, stop! It's over! The gunfire didn't stop immediately. Violence has momentum, hard to halt once it's in motion. But gradually, incrementally, the shooting tapered off. Riders who'd been attacking pulled back. The Brotherhood held their fire, waiting to see what happened next. Caleb dismounted and moved to his father's side, helping Wade down from his horse. The older man's face was white with shock and blood loss, his hand pressed to his wounded shoulder. What did you do? Wade asked, his voice barely above a whisper. What you should have done 3 years ago, Caleb replied, his young face wet with tears. I let it go. Emma stepped out onto the porch, her rifle ready but lowered. Copper moved to stand beside the house, his copper coat dark with sweat and blood, his sides heaving, but his eyes alert. The surviving attackers had pulled back, forming a loose group at the edge of firelight, weapons lowered but ready. Caleb looked up at Emma, his face raw with emotion. "It's over," he said again. "Please, no more killing." "Tell that to Silas Pike," Emma replied, scanning the group of riders. "Where is he?" "Gone," one of the riders said, a grizzled man with a scar running down his cheek. "Rode off when things went sideways. Said he wasn't dying for someone else's revenge. Called us all fools and headed south. Heard him say something about El Paso." "Coward," another rider spat. Wade made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "He's smarter than me," the older man said. His eyes found copper, and the hatred that had burned there for years seemed to flicker and fade, replaced by exhaustion. "That horse, he really is Victor's. I can see it now, the way he fights, the fire in him. Victor loved that about him." "Your brother abused him," Emma said quietly. "I know." Wade's voice was hollow. "I've known for years. Victor had demons, gambling debts, drinking, violence. I made excuse because he was my brother, and brothers protect each other. But the truth is, Victor destroyed that horse just like he destroyed everything else he touched. And I blame the horse because blaming Victor would mean admitting I failed to save him." Silence settled over the ranch, broken only by the sound of injured men groaning and horses shifting nervously. Bull emerged from the house, his shotgun ready. Jacob climbed down from the barn loft. Sam and Doc materialized from their positions. The Brotherhood formed a protective half-circle around Emma and Copper, ready to resume fighting if this turned out to be a trick. But it wasn't a trick. It was surrender. Confession. The moment when a man finally runs out of reasons to keep fighting and has to face what he's become. "I'm sorry," Wade said, and he was looking at Copper, not Emma. "For what Victor did to you. For what I've been trying to do. You didn't murder him. He pushed you until you had no choice. And I know what that feels like because I've been pushing everyone around me the same way." Caleb helped his father toward a horse, supporting him as Wade swayed with blood loss. "We're leaving," the young man said. "All of us. And we're not coming back." He looked at the other riders. "Anyone got a problem with that?" No one spoke. One by one, the attackers mounted their horses and turned toward town. They looked beaten, tired. Some were wounded. All of them had the expression of men who'd expected easy money and found something much harder instead. They rode away into the darkness, and the sound of their departure faded until only the wind remained. Emma stood on her porch with the Brotherhood around her and Copper standing close enough to touch, and she felt something inside her break open. Not break apart, but break open, like a dam releasing pressure that had built for too long. Tears came, sudden and fierce, and she didn't try to stop them. Bull's massive hand rested gently on her shoulder. "It's all right," he said quietly. "It's over." "Is it?" Emma asked through the tears. "Martin Pike is dead. Men are wounded. Wade Thornton just got shot by his own son. How is any of this over?" "Because everyone's walking away," Sam replied. "In my experience, that's the best you can hope for in a situation like this. No one got what they wanted, but everyone gets to live with their choices. That's a kind of resolution." They spent the rest of the night tending wounds and assessing damage. 2 of Wade's men had been killed, both by Jacob's rifle fire. 3 more were seriously wounded. On their side, Emma had taken a grazing shot to her left arm that she hadn't even noticed until Doc pointed out the blood. Bull had bruised ribs from diving behind cover. Copper had multiple shallow cuts and one deeper wound on his shoulder that would need careful watching for infection. As dawn broke over the Texas prairie, painting everything in shades of gold and red, Emma sat on the porch steps with a cup of coffee and watched Copper graze in the paddock. The stallion moved stiffly, favoring his wounded shoulder, but alive, unbroken, surviving, same as always. Doc Harrison settled next to her, his old bones creaking. "You did good," he said. "People died. People made choices," Doc corrected. "Wade chose revenge over reason. Pike chose money over morality. Those men who rode with them chose to attack a woman defending her home. You chose to stand your ground. Only one of those choices was justified. Doesn't make me feel better about it." "It's not supposed to," Doc said gently. "Taking life, even in defense, leaves a mark. You carry it with you. The question is whether you let it define you or drive you." Emma thought about Marcus Carson, 5 years dead in a study in Missouri. Thought about the 2 men who died last night in her yard. Thought about the weight of all those deaths and whether she'd ever be able to set it down. What if I can't carry it? She asked quietly. Then you share the burden, Doc replied, gesturing toward the Brotherhood members scattered around the property. That's what we're here for, to help carry what's too heavy for one person alone. Jacob approached, his one eye scanning the horizon out of habit. Riders coming, two of them, not moving aggressive. Emma stood, her hand moving to her gun. After last night, she wasn't taking chances, but as the riders got closer, she recognized them. Sheriff Hayward from Cottonwood Springs, and beside him, a woman Emma had never seen before. Older, maybe 40, with the kind of worn beauty that spoke of a hard life survived. The sheriff dismounted in the yard, his weathered face unreadable. Miss Carson, he said formally. This is Ruth Thornton, Wade's wife. She has to speak with you. Ruth dismounted with the careful movements of someone nursing old injuries. She approached Emma slowly, her eyes taking in the bullet-scarred walls, the blood-stained dirt, the evidence of last night's battle. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. I need to tell you something, Ruth said, about Victor Thornton, about what really happened the night he died. Emma felt everyone's attention sharpen. I'm listening. I was there, Ruth said quietly, at Victor's ranch in Amarillo. Victor and Wade were my cousins before Wade and I married, so I knew them both growing up. Knew what kind of men they were. She paused, gathering courage. The night Victor died, I was in the house. I heard arguing in the barn, went out to see what was wrong. Found Victor with a gun, pointing it at that horse. She gestured toward Copper. He was going to shoot him. Said the horse had lost his last race and wasn't worth the feed anymore. Emma felt ice slide down her spine. What happened? Victor was drunk, Ruth continued. He fired the gun, but he missed. Scared the horse. Copper reared up, and Victor tried to hit him with the gun. Copper came down. His hooves caught Victor in the chest, knocked him backward. Victor's head hit the corner of a feed bin. I heard the crack from where I was standing. It was an accident, Emma said. Yes, Ruth confirmed. The horse was defending himself. Victor died because he was drunk and violent and pushed an animal too far. But Wade couldn't accept that. Wouldn't accept that his brother was anything less than a victim. So I stayed silent. Let him believe the horse murdered Victor. Let him carry that rage for 3 years because I was afraid of what he'd do if I told the truth. Why are you telling me now? Because last night my son shot his father to save him from himself, Ruth said, and her voice broke. Because this has to end. No more lies, no more revenge, no more death over a tragedy that never should have happened. Sheriff Hayward shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Thornton has given me a sworn statement. I'll be filing it with the county. Far as the law is concerned, that horse is cleared of any wrongdoing in Victor Thornton's death. What about last night? Emma asked. What about the attack? From what I understand, men came onto your property with violent intent, and you defended yourself, the sheriff said carefully. That's your legal right. The men who died made their own choices. Their blood's not on your hands. But it was. Emma could feel the weight of it, same as she felt the weight of Marcus Carson's blood. Legal absolution didn't erase moral complexity. Those men had families, people who loved them, and they were dead because of a chain of events Emma had set in motion by refusing to run. Ruth stepped closer, her eyes searching Emma's face. I know what you're thinking, she said quietly. That you're responsible. That if you'd just given up the horse, none of this would have happened. But that's not true. This started 30 years ago when a drunk man beat his sons and taught them that violence was how you solve problems. It continued when Victor chose gambling and drinking over decency. It escalated when Wade chose revenge over healing. You didn't start this. You just refused to be another victim in a long chain of victims. Doesn't make me feel less responsible. It's not supposed to, Ruth replied, echoing Doc Harrison's words. Taking a stand costs something, always. But the alternative is worse. The alternative is letting men like my husband and his brother dictate who gets to be safe and who doesn't. You stood against that. You won. And yes, people died. But more people would have died if you'd backed down because Wade wouldn't have stopped with the horse. He'd have kept taking until someone finally said no. The sheriff and Ruth left an hour later, taking their truth and their absolution with them. Emma stood in the yard with the Brotherhood, surrounded by evidence of violence survived and prices paid, and tried to feel victorious. She'd defended her land, protected Copper, proved that a woman alone could stand against overwhelming odds and win. But victory tasted like ashes and blood and the knowledge that some stains never wash clean. That evening, as the sun set over the ranch and painted everything in shades of gold that made the world seem softer than it was, Emma walked out to the paddock where Copper waited. The stallion's wounds had been cleaned and bandaged by Doc Harrison. He'd been fed and watered. He was safe, alive, everything Emma had fought for. She opened the paddock gate and stepped inside, closing it behind her. Copper watched her approach, his amber eyes reflecting the sunset light. Emma moved slowly, giving him every chance to retreat, but the stallion stood his ground. When she reached him, she wrapped her arms around his powerful neck and pressed her face against his copper hide. "We won," she whispered. "We survived. Again." Copper stood absolutely still, accepting her embrace, sharing the weight of what they'd endured together. And in that moment, Emma understood something fundamental. She and this horse were bound by more than shared survival. They were bound by the recognition that sometimes violence is the only answer to violence. That sometimes standing your ground means getting blood on your hands. That sometimes winning costs everything except your life, and you have to decide if that's a price you can live with. Emma Carson had made her choice. She would live with it, carry it, let it shape her but not destroy her, because that's what survivors do. They endure, they adapt, they keep moving forward even when the weight threatens to drag them down. And they protect what matters, no matter the cost. She pulled back from Copper and looked into his eyes, seeing her own darkness reflected there. Seeing understanding, acceptance, partnership forged in fire and blood, and the simple truth that some bonds can only be created through shared trauma. "We're not done yet," Emma said quietly. "There's still more to come, but whatever it is, we face it together." Copper lowered his head and Emma rested her forehead against his, sharing breath, sharing space, sharing the quiet moment before the world demanded more from both of them. The war for Willow Creek Ranch was over, but the war with themselves, with their pasts, with the weight of what they'd done to survive, that war would continue for the rest of their lives. And they'd fight it the same way they'd fought everything else. Together, stubborn, unbroken, surviving. Because sometimes that's all you can do, and sometimes that's enough. The months after the battle passed in a strange stillness, like the quiet that follows a storm when the world is rebuilding itself from wreckage. Emma threw herself into the work of transforming Willow Creek Ranch from a broken dream into something real. The house got a new roof, properly sealed against the Texas weather. The barn was rebuilt with stronger timber and better foundations. Fences went up straight and true, marking boundaries that finally felt like they might hold. The brotherhood stayed. Not every day, but often enough that Emma stopped feeling alone in the way she'd been alone for 5 years. Sam Mitchell brought supplies and news from town, his presence a steady reminder that some alliances outlasted the battles that forged them. Jacob Hayes taught Emma to shoot with precision that went beyond basic competency, turning her into someone who could drop a target at 100 yards with iron sights and a steady hand. Bull Crawford helped with the heavy labor, his massive frame making short work of tasks that would have taken Emma days to complete alone. Doc Harrison tended Copper's wounds and gradually earned enough trust that the stallion would tolerate his examinations without the tension that marked his interactions with most humans. Copper himself changed in subtle ways. The wariness never fully left his amber eyes, but it softened. He stopped flinching at sudden movements, started seeking out Emma's company rather than simply tolerating it. The limp in his left foreleg remained, a permanent reminder of old injuries that had healed wrong, but it didn't slow him much. He moved through the paddock with a kind of quiet authority, no longer a fugitive hiding from the world, but a creature that had claimed his territory and defended it successfully. 6 weeks after the battle, Caleb Thornton rode out to the ranch. He came alone, unarmed, his young face carrying the weight of choices that had aged him beyond his years. Emma met him in the yard with her rifle slung over her shoulder, not threatening but not careless either. Some lessons, once learned, stayed learned. "Miss Carson," Caleb said, staying mounted, keeping his hands visible, "I came to tell you my father and I are leaving, selling the ranch, moving to Colorado where we got family." "How's his shoulder?" Emma asked. "Healed, mostly." Caleb's voice was rough. "Doc says he'll never have full use of that arm again. Says it's a mercy he didn't lose it entirely." "And how are you?" Emma asked quietly. "After what you had to do?" Caleb looked away, his jaw working. "I shot my own father. How do you think I am?" "I think you saved his life," Emma replied. "Stopped him from doing something he couldn't take back. That takes courage most men never find." Doesn't feel like courage, feels like betrayal. Sometimes they're the same thing, Emma said. Sometimes loving someone means stopping them from destroying themselves, even if they hate you for it. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his hands tight on the reins. My father wants to apologize, to you and to the horse. But he's too ashamed to come himself. Asked me to tell you he knows what he did was wrong, that he let grief turn him into someone he doesn't recognize. Tell him I understand, Emma said. Tell him grief makes monsters of us all if we let it. But also tell him that understanding doesn't mean forgetting. What he did, what we all did, that stays with us. I will. Caleb gathered his reins, preparing to leave. Then he paused. That horse, Copper, is he worth it? All the death and blood and pain? Is one animal worth all that? Emma looked toward the paddock where Copper stood watching their exchange, his copper coat gleaming in the afternoon sun. It was never about one animal, she said quietly. It was about refusing to let powerful men take whatever they wanted just because they had the strength to take it. It was about standing for something when it would have been easier to run. Your father asked the wrong question. It's not whether Copper was worth fighting for. It's whether principle matters more than convenience. And you think it does? I know it does, Emma replied, because I've tried living without principles, tried running from hard choices and difficult stands, and that path led nowhere except more running. At some point, you have to plant your feet and say this far and no further. This ranch, this horse, this was my line. Caleb nodded slowly, some understanding flickering in his young eyes. I hope you find peace, Miss Carson. I truly do. I hope you do too, Emma said. You and your father both. She watched him ride away until he disappeared into the heat shimmer, then turned to find Copper had moved to the fence nearest the house. The stallion's eyes tracked the departing rider with wary attention, but when Emma approached, he turned that attention to her instead. The Thorntons are leaving, Emma told him, scratching behind his ears in the way he'd come to tolerate and perhaps even enjoy. Moving to Colorado, starting over somewhere the ghosts aren't so thick. She paused. Kind of what we did, I guess, except we are staying in the place where the ghosts live and learning to coexist with them. Copper lowered his head and Emma rested her forehead against his, sharing breath and space, and the quiet understanding that came from surviving the same nightmares. Some bonds couldn't be explained, only experienced. This was one of them. News reached Emma 2 months later through Sam Mitchell, who'd heard it from a traveling merchant who'd passed through El Paso. Silas Pike was dead, shot into the back during a card game dispute, his body left in an alley behind a saloon called the Rusty Spur. The merchant said Pike had been drinking heavy, talking loud about a failed job in Texas, making enemies faster than he could count cards. Someone had decided the world would be better off without him, and Pike's reputation hadn't been enough to save him. Good riddance, Sam said when he delivered the news. Man made his living off other people's misery. World's a cleaner place without him. Emma felt nothing at Pike's death. No satisfaction, no relief, just the acknowledgement that another player in their violent drama had reached his end. She wondered briefly if Pike's family would seek revenge the way Wade had, if this cycle of violence would continue into another generation. Then she decided it didn't matter. She dealt with what came. That's all anyone could do. The ranch began attracting attention as summer turned to fall. Word had spread about the woman who'd bought cursed land for $1 and defended it against overwhelming odds. Some folks thought she was crazy. Others thought she was dangerous. But a few, a small but growing few, saw something different. They saw possibility. Proof that determination could overcome circumstances. That standing your ground mattered even when the odds said you'd lose. Emma found herself hosting visitors with increasing frequency. Women mostly who'd heard the story and wanted to see if it was true. Could a woman really run a ranch alone? Really defend herself against men with guns and power? Really build something from nothing in a world that said such things were impossible? Emma told them the truth, that she wasn't alone, that the Brotherhood had stood with her when it mattered most, that luck had played as much a role as skill, that she carried the weight of the men who died on her property and probably always would. But she also told them that yes, it was possible, that standing your ground was hard and costly and sometimes meant becoming someone you didn't recognize in the mirror. But it was possible. One of those visitors arrived on a September morning in 1889, just over a year after the battle. A young woman named Sarah Brennan, 17 years old with fire in her eyes and bruises on her arms that she tried to hide beneath long sleeves. She came on foot, carrying everything she owned in a flour sack and desperation in her voice. "My father says a woman's place is cooking and cleaning and keeping quiet," Sarah said, standing in Emma's yard with her chin raised in defiance. "Says if I don't obey, he'll marry me off to his friend who's 40 years old and already buried 2 wives. I ran. Don't have anywhere to go. But I heard about you, heard you teach women to stand." Emma looked at this girl who reminded her painfully of herself at 17, before Marcus Carson in Missouri and the long years of running. "I don't teach women to stand," Emma said quietly. "I teach them that they already know how. They just need permission to do it." Sarah stayed. Emma gave her a corner of the house and put her to work with the horses, starting with the gentlest mare and working up to Copper, who proved surprisingly tolerant of the girl's tentative approach. Sarah had a gift with animals, a patience and intuition that couldn't be taught. She learned to ride, to shoot, to read the land and weather. She learned that strength wasn't just physical but mental, the ability to endure when endurance seemed impossible. Other young women followed over the next year. Not many, but enough that Emma found herself running something that looked like a school without ever intending to. She taught them practical skills: ranching, self-defense, financial independence. But more importantly, she taught them that they had choices, that running from a bad situation wasn't cowardice, it was survival. That fighting back when someone hurt you wasn't wrong, it was necessary. That building a life on your own terms was possible, even when the whole world said it wasn't. The Brotherhood watched this development with quiet approval. These were men who'd spent decades trying to atone for violence they couldn't undo. Watching Emma create something constructive from the ashes of battle, watching young women learn to defend themselves and claim their own power, felt like redemption of a kind they'd stopped believing possible. Bull Crawford expressed it one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "We fought a war that didn't solve anything," he said, his deep voice contemplative. "Killed men who probably didn't deserve killing. Came home to find the world unchanged by all that blood. But this, what you're building here, this might actually matter. These girls you're teaching, they'll go out into the world different, stronger. And maybe they'll teach others. Maybe that's how change actually happens. Not through war, but through one woman at a time learning she doesn't have to accept the unacceptable." Emma thought about that as the months turned into years. Thought about Marcus Carson and the night she'd shot him. Thought about the men who'd defending and attacking this ranch. Thought about violence and whether it ever truly solved anything or just created new problems that future generations would have to address. She didn't have answers, but she had purpose. And in a life that had been defined by running and hiding, purpose felt revolutionary. Copper remained the heart of everything Emma built. The stallion was no longer just her horse, but a symbol of survival against impossible odds. The young women Emma taught learned to approach him carefully, to read his body language, to understand that trust was earned through patience and consistency. Some of them saw their own trauma reflected in Copper's wariness. Others saw proof that even the most broken things could heal if given time and safety. Doc Harrison examined Copper every few months, documenting the stallion's gradual recovery from years of abuse and neglect. "He'll never be what he could have been," Doc said after one such examination. "The malnutrition stunted his development. The injuries will cause him pain as he ages, but he's healthy, strong. He's got years in him yet." "How many years?" Emma asked. "Hard to say with horses. 10 if we're lucky, maybe 15. Depends on how his old injuries hold up." Doc cleaned his instruments with methodical care. "Question is, what happens to this place when he's gone? You've built something around him, around his story. What's the legacy when the horse who started it all is just a memory?" Emma hadn't let herself think that far ahead. Couldn't imagine this ranch without Copper's copper presence at its center. But Doc's question stayed with her, demanding an answer she didn't have. The answer came from an unexpected source. 2 years after the battle, in the summer of 1890, a man arrived at the ranch driving a wagon loaded with supplies and leading a string of 3 horses behind. He was maybe 70, weathered by decades in the sun, moving with the careful precision of someone whose body had outlasted his youth, but not his will. He introduced himself as Isaiah Carter, horse breeder from Kansas, and he had a story to tell. I bred Copper, Isaiah said, sitting on Emma's porch with a cup of coffee warming his gnarled hands. Raised him from a foal, sold him to a man I thought was respectable when the horse was 2 years old. Didn't know the buyer was Victor Thornton until years later. Didn't know what Victor did to him. Why are you here? Emma asked. Because I owe that horse a debt, Isaiah replied. I put him in harm's way through ignorance. Can't undo that, but I can try to make it right. He pulled papers from his coat. These are breeding records. Copper's lineage. He comes from championship stock. Desert bloodlines mixed with cavalry horses. Speed and endurance. Intelligence bred through 5 generations of careful selection. Emma looked at the papers, seeing names and dates that traced Copper's ancestry back decades. What am I supposed to do with this? Breed him, Isaiah said simply. Copper's got years left. And those horses I brought, they're quality mares. You breed them to Copper, you'll get foals that carry his bloodline forward. His strength, his intelligence, his survival instinct. He met Emma's eyes. That horse has a legacy worth preserving. Don't let it die with him. Emma spent 3 days thinking about Isaiah's proposition. She consulted the Brotherhood, got Doc Harrison's medical opinion on whether Copper was healthy enough for breeding, talked to the young women she'd been teaching about what it would mean to expand the ranch's purpose. In the end, the decision felt inevitable. Copper's story deserved to continue beyond his lifetime. And what better legacy than children who carried his strength into a future he'd helped make possible? The first foal was born on a spring morning in 1891, 3 years after the battle. A filly, copper-colored like her father, with the same intelligent eyes and powerful build. Emma was there for the birth, along with Doc Harrison and Sarah Brennan, who'd stayed on as Emma's assistant and proven herself invaluable. They watched the filly struggle to her feet on shaking legs, watched Copper approach his daughter with cautious curiosity, watched the beginning of something that would outlast all of them. What will you name her? Sarah asked. Emma thought about Martha Harlow's journal, about Ruth Thornton's confession, about all the women who'd suffered in silence because speaking up seemed impossible. Freedom, Emma said. Her name is Freedom. More foals followed over the years, each one carrying Copper's distinctive coloring and his remarkable temperament. Emma sold some to carefully vetted buyers, people she trusted to treat the animals with respect. Others she kept, building a breeding program that attracted attention from across Texas and beyond. The ranch that had cost $1 became profitable, then successful, then legendary. But success brought its own complications. With money came pressure. Horse traders wanted to buy Copper himself, offering sums that would have set Emma up for life. Military buyers wanted his bloodline for cavalry remounts. Racing enthusiasts saw championship potential in his offspring. Emma refused them all. Copper wasn't for sale. Neither was his story or his dignity. One afternoon in 1893, Emma was working in the barn when she heard a familiar voice calling from the yard. She stepped out to find a young man, maybe 20, standing beside a fine black horse. It took her a moment to recognize him. Jesse, the boy who'd been whittling outside the general store the day she'd arrived in Cottonwood Springs 5 years ago. Miss Carson, Jesse said, removing his hat. Don't know if you remember me. I'm Jesse Cooper. I showed you where the courthouse was back when you first came to town. I remember, Emma said, smiling. You warned me about the cursed ranch. Jesse grinned. Seems you proved the curse wrong. I've been following your story, ma'am. The whole town has. What you've built here, it's remarkable. He paused. I came because I heard you might be looking for help. I've been working ranches since I was 14, but I want to learn from someone who knows what they're doing, someone who treats horses right. Emma studied the young man Jesse had become. Solid, honest, carrying himself with the quiet confidence of someone who'd worked hard and earned his place. What makes you think I treat horses right? Because Copper's still alive, Jesse said simply. Any other person would have sold him or put him down when the trouble started. You fought for him. That tells me everything I need to know. Jesse stayed, becoming Emma's first paid employee. He had a gift for the work, that same patience and intuition Sarah had shown. Between the two of them, they managed the growing operation while Emma focused on teaching the steady stream of young women who arrived seeking what she'd found: strength, purpose, and the knowledge that they could survive anything. The years accumulated like sediment, building layers of experience over the raw foundation of that first terrible year. Emma turned 30, then 35. The young women she taught grew up and left to build their own lives, replaced by new students who needed the same lessons. The brotherhood aged. Sam Mitchell's hands grew arthritic. Jacob Hayes lost his remaining vision to cataracts and had to give up sharpshooting, though he stayed on to teach tactics and strategy. Bull Crawford's massive frame began to shrink as age claimed the muscle that had defined him. Only Doc Harrison seemed unchanged, as if the act of healing others somehow preserved him. They gathered on Emma's porch one evening in the summer of 1898, 7 years after the battle that had bound them together. The sun was setting in shades of orange and gold, painting the ranch in colors that made everything look softer than it was. Copper grazed in the distance, 16 years old now, his copper coat graying around the muzzle, his movements careful on joints that had started to stiffen. "We're getting old," Bull said with the bluntness of a man who'd never seen the point in pretending. "All of us need to talk about what happens when we're gone." "I'm not going anywhere," Emma protested. "Not tomorrow," Sam agreed, "but someday. And when that day comes, this place needs to continue. The work you've started, teaching women to stand, breeding horses that carry Copper's legacy, it's too important to die with us." They spent that evening planning, drew up papers that would establish Willow Creek Ranch as a permanent institution, a school for young women, a breeding program for horses with championship bloodlines, a sanctuary for animals and humans who'd been broken by violence and needed space to heal. Emma signed documents that made her vision legally binding, that ensured the ranch would survive beyond her lifetime. "It's a legacy," Jacob said, his blind eyes turned toward the sunset he could no longer see. "Most men never build anything that outlasts them. You've built something that'll matter for generations." Emma thought about that word. Legacy. She'd come to Texas running from death and darkness, carrying guilt that had felt too heavy to bear. She'd bought cursed land for $1 and found a horse everyone said should be destroyed. And from those broken pieces, she'd built something that would outlive them all. It felt impossible. It felt earned. Copper died in the spring of 1904, 22 years old and surrounded by the family he had helped create. 12 offspring grazed in the pastures, each one carrying his distinctive coloring and remarkable intelligence. Emma was with him at the end, sitting in the stall where they'd first met 16 years earlier, her hand on his copper neck as his breathing grew shallow and labored. She'd known it was coming. Doc Harrison had warned her weeks ago that Copper's heart was failing, that the years of abuse and hard living were catching up despite her care. But knowing didn't make it easier, didn't make the absence hurt less, didn't fill the hole that opened in her chest as she watched the life fade from those amber eyes that had seen so much, survived so much, meant so much. "It's all right," Emma whispered, her voice breaking. "You can rest now. You've earned it. You've done everything you needed to do and more. You saved me. You gave me a reason to stop running, to stand, to build something that matters." Copper's breathing hitched, steadied, then hitched again. His eyes found hers one last time, and Emma saw in them the same recognition she'd felt that first day in the barn. Two broken souls who'd found each other when they both needed it most, who'd survived together, who'd built something beautiful from violence and trauma and stubborn refusal to quit. "Thank you," Emma said through tears, "for everything, for fighting with me, for trusting me, for showing me that redemption is possible even when you can't undo the past. I love you. I'll always love you." Copper's eyes closed. His breathing slowed, gentled, and then stopped. Emma felt the moment his spirit left, felt the weight of his absence settle over the barn like fog. She stayed there for a long time, her hand on his cooling body, saying goodbye to the partner who'd defined her second life. They buried Copper on the hill overlooking the ranch, in a spot where he used to stand and survey his territory like a general reviewing his troops. Emma had a stone marker carved with simple words: Copper, not a killer, a survivor, 1882 to 1904. The Brotherhood attended the burial, aged men paying respects to a horse who'd given them a chance at redemption they'd thought impossible. "He saved us," Bull said quietly as they stood around the grave. "All of us. Gave us something worth fighting for when we'd forgotten what that felt like." "He saved me too," Emma replied, her voice steady despite the grief. "I was running when I found him. Or maybe he found me. Either way, he gave me a reason to stop running, to stand, to build instead of hide." Sarah stood beside Emma, now a woman of 24 who ran much of the ranch's daily operations. "What he built is still here," Sarah said gently. "In his children, In this place, in all of us who learn from him. Emma nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She knew Sarah was right. Copper's legacy was everywhere she looked, but that didn't make his absence any easier to bear. The years after Copper's death were harder than Emma expected. The ranch continued. The breeding program thrived. Young women came and learned and left stronger than they'd arrived. But the heart of it all was gone, buried on a hill where the wind moved through the grass like breath through lungs. Emma felt the loss every day, in small moments when she'd turn expecting to see copper hide and amber eyes and find only empty space. But the legacy held. Copper's children produced children of their own. His bloodline spread across Texas and beyond. Horses known for intelligence and endurance and the kind of stubborn survival instinct that couldn't be taught, only bred. Stories about the copper stallion who'd survived abuse and defended his territory against overwhelming odds became legend. Parents told their children. Cowboys swapped tales around campfires. The horse who'd cost Emma everything and given her everything became myth. Emma turned 45 in 1910, 22 years after buying Willow Creek Ranch for $1. She stood on her porch on her birthday morning, drinking coffee and watching the sun rise over the land she'd defended with blood and built with determination. Copper's oldest daughter, Freedom, grazed in the paddock with her own offspring, 3 generations of survival and strength represented in copper-colored hide and intelligent eyes. Sarah Brennan, now 27 and running the ranch's day-to-day operations, joined Emma on the porch. "We got 7 new students starting next month," she reported. 2 from as far as California. Word's spreading about what we do here. "What do we do here?" Emma asked, genuinely curious how Sarah would answer. "We teach women they don't have to accept the unacceptable," Sarah replied without hesitation. "We show them that standing up for yourself isn't wrong. It's necessary. We prove that strength isn't just physical, but mental and moral. We give them tools to build lives on their own terms." She paused. "Same thing you gave me when I showed up with bruises and desperation and nowhere else to go." Emma thought about that frightened 17-year-old who'd appeared in her yard 11 years ago, looked at the confident woman standing beside her now, felt something settle in her chest that might have been peace, or at least the possibility of it. "You ever regret it?" Sarah asked quietly. "The violence, the deaths, the price you paid to hold this ground?" Emma was quiet for a long moment, considering. "I regret that it was necessary," she said finally. "I regret that men like Wade Thornton couldn't let go of their grief and had to turn it into violence. I regret that people died who might have lived if different choices had been made. But do I regret standing, fighting, refusing to run? No, because running didn't save me before, and it wouldn't have saved me then. What did save you? A copper horse and $1's worth of cursed land, and the stubborn refusal to accept that some people deserve to suffer while others prosper," Emma replied. "And maybe that's the real legacy, not the ranch or the horses or even the women we teach. Maybe the legacy is the idea that standing up matters, that refusing to be a victim is a choice you can make even when everything says you're powerless." They stood together on the porch as the sun climbed higher and the ranch came alive with the sounds of horses and students in the daily work of building something that mattered. Emma felt the weight of her years, the scars she carried from Missouri and Texas and battles fought in darkness and daylight. But she also felt the strength that came from surviving, from standing, from planting roots so deep that nothing could tear them free. That evening, Emma walked up the hill to Copper's grave as the sun began to set. It had become a ritual over the years, this pilgrimage to the resting place of the horse who'd changed everything. She sat down in the grass beside the stone marker and spoke to the silence. "Your great-grandchildren are beautiful," she said quietly, "smart and strong and carrying your legacy forward. We've taught 62 women over the years, 62 girls who arrived broken and left whole. The ranch is profitable, respected. We're doing good work." The wind moved through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and summer heat. "I miss you," Emma continued, and her voice cracked despite the years that had passed. "Every day, I see you and your children and their children. I hear you in the stories that people tell, but it's not the same as having you here, as knowing you're standing in the paddock, watching over everything, keeping me honest and brave." She wiped her eyes, not ashamed of the tears. Grief didn't expire. It just became part of the landscape you learned to navigate. I kept my promise, Emma said. The one I made that first morning when someone wrote threats in the barn. I protected you, stood with you, refused to let them take you or break you or destroy what you represented. And you kept your promise too. You taught me that survival isn't enough, that sometimes you have to fight for more than just staying alive. You have to fight for dignity, for purpose, for the right to exist on your own terms. The sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades that reminded Emma of copper's hide, gold and copper and amber, colors that held warmth even as darkness approached. I hope wherever you are, you're at peace, Emma whispered. I hope you know that what we built here, what we fought for, it mattered. It matters still, and it'll keep mattering long after I'm gone too, because we built it on truth and blood and the stubborn refusal to quit when quitting would have been easier. She stood, her knees protesting the movement in a way they hadn't when she was 28 and buying a ranch for $1. Time claimed everyone eventually, but it didn't erase what you built, didn't diminish what you stood for, didn't make the battles you fought any less important. Emma walked back down the hill as stars began emerging in the darkening sky, back to the ranch she'd defended, and the life she'd built, and the legacy she'd created from nothing but determination and $1. Behind her on the hill where Copper rested, the grass moved in the evening breeze like breath, like memory, like the ghost of a copper stallion still watching over the territory he'd claimed and the woman who'd stood with him when the whole world said she should run. Some stories end with victory, some with defeat. This story ended with survival, which was perhaps the truest victory of all. Emma Carson had bought a cursed ranch for $1 and found a horse everyone called a killer. Together, they'd built something worth dying for, and more importantly, worth living for. They'd proved that strength came in many forms, that standing your ground mattered even when the odds said you'd lose. That legacy wasn't about monuments or wealth, but about the lives you touched, and the changes you made, and the stubborn refusal to let darkness win. The ranch continued. The students came and learned and left stronger. Copper's bloodline spread across the West, horses known for intelligence and endurance, and the kind of survival instinct that saved lives. And on quiet evenings when the wind was right, people swore they could see a copper stallion standing on the hill, watching over the land he'd defended, the woman he'd saved, and the legacy they'd built together from nothing but courage and $1's worth of faith. Some bonds transcend death. Some stories outlive their participants. And some truths, once established through blood and determination, become permanent fixtures in the landscape of what's possible. This was one of those truths. And Emma Carson, standing on her porch at 45 with gray threading through her dark hair and scars mapping her history, knew that whatever else happened, whatever time took from her, she'd built something that would last. Not forever, because nothing lasts forever, but long enough to matter, long enough to change lives, long enough to prove that a woman and a horse, both broken by violence and held together by stubbornness, could create something beautiful from the wreckage. And sometimes that's all the redemption anyone needs. The stars emerged one by one, mapping the darkness with light, same as they'd done every night for as long as humans had looked up and wondered about legacy and meaning, and whether their lives mattered in the vast indifference of eternity. Emma watched them appear, those distant fires burning in the void, and she thought about Copper and the Brotherhood and all the people who'd helped build this unlikely sanctuary. She thought about Marcus Carson, dead 22 years but still part of her story. She thought about Wade Thornton and his son Caleb, living out their days in Colorado with wounds that would never fully heal. She thought about Silas Pike, dead in an El Paso alley, his violence finally catching up to him. She thought about the young women who'd passed through this ranch and taken its lessons into a world that needed them desperately. And she thought about a copper horse who'd been pushed beyond endurance and fought back, whose legacy of survival against impossible odds had become the foundation for something bigger than either of them could have imagined in that barn 16 years ago, when a desperate woman and a traumatized horse first recognized themselves in each other's eyes. The wind moved through the grass, the stars burned in the darkness, and Emma Carson, survivor, fighter, builder of legacies, stood on her porch and felt something she hadn't felt in Missouri or during the long years of running, or even in the immediate aftermath of the battle that had defined her second life. She felt complete. She felt whole. She felt finally and fully redeemed. Not because she'd erased her past or atoned for her violence or fixed everything that was broken, but because she'd taken all that darkness and built something meaningful from it, because she'd stood when running would have been easier, because she'd chosen to protect the vulnerable instead of exploiting them, because she'd turned a dollar and a cursed ranch and a so-called killer horse into a sanctuary that changed lives and challenged assumptions and proved that redemption was possible even for the most broken souls. Emma Carson went to bed that night with stars visible through her window and the sound of horses moving in the darkness and the knowledge that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to stand for something that mattered. She slept without nightmares for the first time in years. And in her dreams, if she dreamed at all, a copper stallion ran free across endless prairie, under a sky so vast it seemed to hold all the possibilities the world had to offer. Some stories end with triumph, some with tragedy. This story ended with truth. And the truth was simple, profound, and hard-won through blood and tears and stubborn determination. Redemption is possible. Legacy matters. And sometimes the best thing you can do with a broken life is use the pieces to build something beautiful. Emma Carson and Copper had done exactly that. And their story passed down through generations of students and horses and people who needed to believe that standing up for yourself was possible, became proof that even in the darkest times, hope endures. The ranch endured, the bloodline endured, the truth endured, and that, in the end, was redemption enough.